Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Daphne Gwynn, a Senior Regulatory Health Project Manager in the FDA Office of Clinical Pharmacology and the Program Manager for the newly formed CDER Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence. I want to thank you all for joining us today for this first workshop from the QuantMed COE. Before we get started, a couple of logistical reminders. Next slide. The views presented in this workshop represent the personal opinions of the individual speakers and panelists and do not reflect the official positions of the US FDA. Next slide. You will be muted throughout the workshop. If you would like to ask a question or provide comments, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can also direct your comments or inquiries to the email address cderquantmed@fda.hhs.gov. We are recording this workshop and we will be distributing the recording and slides after the workshop on the workshop webpage. Next slide. I would now like to welcome Dr. Patrizia Cavazzoni, the Director of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research here at FDA, to provide some opening remarks. Dr. Cavazzoni.
Thank you, Daphne. Good morning, everyone. I am pleased and honored to kick off today's workshop, which marks the inauguration of CDER's new Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence. CDER has had a long history and has been at the forefront of quantitative medicine, or QM, in drug development and regulatory decision-making throughout the drug life cycle. To facilitate and grow the application of QM approaches, over the years, we have published many regulatory guidance documents and have established some well-known regulatory programs, including the Model-Informed Drug Development and the Complex Innovative Trial Design Meeting Programs, the Fit for Purpose Initiative, and the Model Integrated Evidence Meeting Pilot between FDA and generic drug applicants. These programs have had considerable impact on drug development. For example, the MIDD meeting program has allowed for conceptual, strategic, and technical alignment between quantitative clinical pharmacologists and other experts, such as clinicians and biostatisticians from FDA and industry, and enabled the successful use of MIDD approaches to address important drug development issues. We have heard from participants about the tangible impact of the MIDD program, including development cycle time savings of up to 2 years and estimated cost savings of up to 30 to 70 million US dollars for some participating programs. The high degree of satisfaction from those involved demonstrates the value of applying innovative quantitative methods to drug development and review. Later today, you will hear more from other speakers about some of these programs and other initiatives across CDER. Despite the significant achievements in the quantitative medicine space, we looked for opportunities to amplify this work across CDER by coordinating efforts to strategic planning and execution. As we thought about this, it became clear that we needed to create the central hub that fosters collaboration and scientific excellence across the relevant CDER offices and disciplines, and facilitate engagements with external groups. The new CDER Quantitative Medicine COE will function as a collaborative and coordinated body that spurs innovation and fosters comprehensive integration of QM approaches to advance the development of medical products and inform regulatory decision-making. Quantitative medicine approaches provide a framework for integrating mechanistic knowledge with empirical information by employing advanced quantitative methods. This feature makes QM approaches particularly well-suited to advancing the development of biomarker endpoint relationships, better characterization of disease progression, and the evaluation of totality of evidence. QM approaches have high potential to bring about much-needed efficiencies in the regulatory assessment for areas of high unmet medical need, in particular in the development and review of therapies for rare diseases. Last year's approval of the first therapy for an ultra-rare genetic form of ALS is an example of the application of quantitative medicine approaches to the review of complex data. We have high expectations for the QMCOE as we look for more ways to accelerate the development and review of rare disease therapies. Today, we're putting a stake in the ground with this new initiative, and we intend to drive the advancement and integration of quantitative medicine approaches in drug development, application review, and regulatory decision-making. This Center of Excellence is an incredible opportunity to streamline drug development and accelerate the delivery of drugs to patients by deploying the most advanced quantitative methods. In the coming year, you will receive updates from the Quantitative Medicine COE on strategic goals, educational opportunities, and new initiatives. Thank you for your participation. I look forward to hearing the outcome of today's workshop and to your engagement and partnership as we establish this important new program.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cavazzoni, for setting the stage for this. I'd now like to welcome Dr. Raj Matabushi, the Associate Director for Guidance and Scientific Policy in the FDA Office of Clinical Pharmacology, and the Director and the newly appointed Director of the CDER Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence, to provide an introduction on the COE.
Thank you, Daphne. Greetings, everyone. Last month, when we announced the formation of the CDER Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence, we noted tremendous excitement, interest, and curiosity. As we gather today in this virtual setting, we hope to share some more information and perspectives around this new CDER initiative. Before I get into the specifics, I would like to make sure we are all on the same page as to what we mean by quantitative medicine. We define quantitative medicine as the development and application of exposure-based biological and quantitative modeling and simulation approaches derived from a wide variety of sources such as non-clinical, clinical, and real-world data to inform drug development, regulatory decision-making, and patient care. When appropriately applied, we believe quantitative medicine approaches can streamline and accelerate drug development throughout the product's life cycle, provide information with respect to identifying, quantifying, and addressing uncertainty earlier in the life cycle, and most importantly, contribute to the totality of understanding of a drug's benefits and risks. CDER has had a long history of applying and leveraging quantitative medicine approaches across a variety of instances, ranging from pre-market product reviews, post-market product assessments, development of policy and implementation. Some of the examples of these initiatives include the Model-Informed Drug Development Initiative led by the Office of Clinical Pharmacology and the Complex Innovative Trial Design led by the Office of Biostatistics, both of which have resulted in newer and dedicated forums for regulatory engagements, such as the MIDD paired meeting program and CID paired meeting programs. The Fit for Purpose initiative is a classic example of collaborative efforts between disciplines in the Office of Translational Sciences that provide a pathway for regulatory acceptance of dynamic tools for use in drug development. Over the past decade, we have seen increasing applications of quantitative approaches in the generic drug space, including heavy investments in the regulatory science research and development of quantitative medicine approaches. Last year, we announced the Model Integrated Evidence Industry Pilot Meeting Program, which was aimed at identifying instances where model-based approaches can be used for the assessment of bioequivalence in certain settings. In the Office of pharmaceutical quality, we have seen a lot of efforts, both internally as well as in the community, to develop policy for the application of physiology-based biopharmaceutics modeling to support drug product development, manufacturing changes, and controls. We will hear more about these initiatives during the presentations as well as discussions throughout the day. With the rapid expansion of quantitative medicine approaches in the regulatory reviews as well as interactions, we saw a profound opportunity to maximize synergies across CDER by centrally coordinating our efforts with respect to strategic planning and execution, which led to the establishment of the CDER Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence, which is a CDER-wide enterprise that will facilitate the continuous evolution and consistent application of quantitative medicine for drug development and regulatory decision-making. The Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence has 4 major goals: to spur innovation, to advance medical product development, to inform regulatory decision-making, and promote public health through the application of cutting-edge and robust quantitative medicine approaches. This effort brings together 5 different super-offices in CDER, namely the Office of Center Director. In the Office of Translational Sciences, we have participations from Office of Biostatistics and Office of Clinical Pharmacology. In the Office of New Drugs, the representatives are from Office of New Drug Policy as well as from clinical offices. In the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, we have representation from Office of Pharmaceutical Quality Research as well as Offices of Product Quality Assessment. And lastly, in the Office of Generic Drugs, our partners are Office of Research and Standards. To ensure the Center of Excellence is equipped to carry out its mission, we have identified a governance model that will leverage our collective strengths. The COE will be governed by the Center Director, a Director of the Center of Excellence, as well as an Executive Board and a Board Chair. The Executive Board will have representations across the various CDER offices engaged in quantitative medicine. Together, this group will be responsible for setting up of the strategic priorities for the center. Based on the strategic plan and the developed implementation plan, various task forces will be created and managed with appropriate project management support to realize the goals. Staff and leadership from the participating offices will constitute these task forces. We believe that this governance model is designed to foster collaboration and connectivity across key stakeholders in CDER. This model also ensures clarity of roles and responsibilities and accountability to be able to meet our goals in an efficient and effective manner. Of note, this program is not a reorganization or realignment, but it is a strategic enhancement aimed at building and strengthening the connective tissue around quantitative medicine in CDER. Our leadership includes Dr. Patrizia Cavazzoni, who is our executive sponsor. I'm honored to be appointed as the Director of the Center of Excellence. Dr. Issam Zineh will serve as the Board Chair, and Dr. Daphne Gwynn, the Board Project Manager. Our board members include leadership from each of the 7 participating offices in the CDER, and you will be hearing from them in the presentation and panel discussions later today. I want to take a moment to acknowledge their efforts over the past year, which have been instrumental in developing the framework for the establishment of the center. And I express my gratitude for their continued commitment to operationalize the center. Now I will pivot to provide a high-level overview on the scope and focus of the Center of Excellence and close out with what we are looking forward to. The technical scope for the CDER Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence involves a range of methods which are very commonly used, such as the pharmacostatistical methods, which range from PK/PD modeling, exposure response, POP PK, those which are highly precedented. The mechanistic modeling space involves the development and application of physiologic-based pharmacokinetic or biopharmaceutics models, quantitative systems pharmacology, systems biology, and so on and so forth. We'll also be expanding our reach into the application of machine learning and artificial intelligence approaches as they pertain to quantitative medicines. One such example is our past use of machine learning to determine a suitable patient population for anakinra for the treatment of COVID-19 under the emergency use authorization. We will also be exploring how these approaches can be combined with our conventional modeling and simulation tools to enhance their performance or increase efficiencies. We'll be utilizing many of these quantitative medicine approaches for furthering the advancement in the development of biomarker endpoint relationships, better characterization of disease progression, and contribute to the totality of evidence. We'll also be using these methods alone or in combination for conducting clinical trial simulations as well as in silico predictions, including exploring about the concepts of digital twins. So all in all, these methodologies or these technical aspects are within the purview or scope of the CDER Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence. Our initial focus areas are threefold, starting with applied science policy. The center will spearhead the development and implementation of evidence-based scientific guidances, policies, and best practices as they relate to quantitative medicine approaches. We will also make investments into the knowledge management through cataloging of precedences and disseminating those to promote the best practices standards as well as uptake of quantitative medicine approaches, not only in the regulatory assessment, but also in drug development. Our second focus area is multidisciplinary education and scientific exchange, which involves us providing educational opportunities and resources to the community, both internal as well as external, to promote implementation and uptake of quantitative method techniques. As part of our stakeholder engagement, we will convene and engage interactions with various subject matter experts and external stakeholders through outreach and collaborative activities. And last focus area is, as we are standing up and operationalizing this Center of Excellence, our strategic planning and coordination, which will involve with the center taking the lead on identifying the priorities and determining the areas for further research and development in CDER. We'll also coordinate the existing efforts or elevate efforts as may be needed, and with an aim of developing and implementing strategic and tactical plans to address the goals of the Center of Excellence. As we look forward to our next steps, these will involve us developing strategic and tactical plans, which we hope to share with you at some time in the near future. Use those to create task forces which will be aimed at specific goals and objectives that are identified as priority areas to be addressed going forward. Look forward for various stakeholder engagement activities as well as resources that will be forthcoming, especially the educational resources in the near future. As I conclude today's presentation, I urge each of you to consider how you can contribute to this exciting initiative. Together, we can champion, advance, and integrate quantitative medicine for maximizing patient and societal benefits. For those who are interested in collaborating or learning more about our initiatives, please reach out to us via the email displayed on the slide. Thank you for your attention and participation today, and look forward to the proceedings. With that,
Thank you so much, Dr. Matabushi, for that introduction to the COE. We're now going to hear from the stakeholder groups within FDA on past, present, and future efforts in the quantitative medicine space. We'll begin with Dr. Hao Zhu, Director of the Division of Pharmacometrics in the FDA Office of Clinical Pharmacology.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm honored to summarize development, implementation, and impact of quantitative medicine in the Office of Clinical Pharmacology over the years. Additionally, I will discuss how our accumulated experiences may shape our future, particularly within the Center of Excellence for Quantitative Medicine. Well, the figure illustrates how quantitative medicine in the Office of Clinical Pharmacology is like a vast mansion, built upon a foundation of skilled review staff and strong leadership over decades. It highlights four main pillars that guide us toward successfully implementing quantitative tools in clinical pharmacology. A critical driving force among these is technical exploration. Ongoing efforts in this area have introduced novel tools and innovative concepts into our daily review process and policy development. Working closely with both internal and external stakeholders has been indispensable. Collaboration across various FDA disciplines, such as clinical, statistical, and other teams, have enhanced our capabilities. Joint efforts with the industry and academia have broadened the application of new quantitative tools, streamlining drug development and improving patient care. Sponsors play a pivotal role in driving innovation in drug and tool development. The office has established multiple mechanisms for earlier engagement with the sponsors, aiming to foster innovation and in quantitative medicine. Lastly, key findings and experiences from reviews and research projects inform new policy development, allowing us to use past insights to shape future changes. In the next few slides, I'm going to quickly walk you through the four key elements with some examples. Technical exploration using novel tools broadens the capabilities of quantitative medicine with the Office of Clinical Pharmacology. The office's evolution reflects significant changes over the years. Initially, biopharmaceutical models, particularly in vitro and in vivo correlation models, deepened our understanding of drug dissolution and absorption, enhancing product quality control. Pharmacokinetic models offer a mathematical framework to track concentration changes over time, aiding in tailored dosing selection for patient subgroups with varying absorption or elimination rates. Population pharmacokinetics and physiologically based pharmacokinetics extend our grasp of pharmacokinetic process to population and mechanistic levels. Exposure response models link concentration fluctuation with biomarker changes observed in lab tests and clinical outcomes, allowing us to balance efficacy and safety in drug responses to determine optimal dosages. Recently, mathematical equations have been employed to model disease progression and patient behaviors like premature trial discontinuation. And these tools, used individually or in combination, optimize clinical trial designs and accelerate drug development. Currently, cutting-edge methodologies such as artificial intelligence and quantitative systems pharmacology, integrated with innovative data sources such as digital biomarkers and real-world data, continue to widen the scope of quantitative medicine, thereby improving trial success rate and advancing precision medicine. Let's examine disease models to demonstrate how such tools can enhance drug development. In the Office of Clinical Pharmacology, developing disease models is a strategic objective to enhance quantitative medicine. Over the past decade, in collaboration with both internal and external colleagues, the office has established 14 disease models in areas such as oncology, neurology, psychiatry, cardiology, and autoimmune diseases, etc. For instance, the non-small cell lung cancer model was developed to refine late-phase clinical trial designs. Models for Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease serve as a platform to evaluate alternative endpoints and optimize clinical trial design components. Schizophrenia and bipolar I models provide a basis for pediatric extrapolation from adults, reducing the need for separate clinical efficacy safety trials in pediatric patients and thereby accelerating pediatric drug development. Additionally, covariate findings from Duchenne muscular dystrophy model enhance patient enrichment and stratified randomization. These disease models are crucial tools for modernizing drug development. Well, the development of quantitative medicine in clinical pharmacology is a collaborative effort involving all internal and external stakeholders. This collaboration is evident in numerous reviews, research projects, policy development, training programs. Internally, we maintain close partnerships with various offices within the CDER for drug evaluation and research, including Office of New Drugs, Office of Biostatistics, Office of Generic Drugs, and Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. Additionally, we have established close collaborations with the teams in the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health, and the Oncology Center of Excellence. Externally, we engage with scientists from academia, professional associations, and global agencies to advance the use of novel quantitative tools that enhance new drug development and patient care. Well, this slide highlights examples of collaborative efforts undertaken by the office to foster innovation. Internally, we have partnered with various FDA units on research projects aimed at streamlining drug development, enhancing patient selection, and identifying appropriate endpoints. This collaboration is also extended to the development of new guidance and policies, scientific exchanges, and workshops. Additionally, we engage in extensive collaboration with academia, professional associations, and global agencies. For instance, we have initiated multiple research projects with academic institutions to address challenges in disease areas with unmet medical needs and to explore new methodologies. We collaborate with global agencies to harmonize policies on model-informed drug development. Furthermore, we work closely with professional societies like International Society of Pharmacometrics to establish technical standards. Or to enhance the integration of innovative quantitative tools in drug development, the Office of Clinical Pharmacology endorses two major initiatives for sponsor engagement. The first, MIDD Pair Meeting Program. It is co-administered by CDER and CBER for IND, NDA, and BLA holders. This program supports the use of advanced modeling tools within specific projects, fostering an environment that enhances stakeholder acceptance of MIDD techniques. It aims to develop standards and best practices for consistent application and evaluation of modeling and simulation tools, while also expanding the capacity and expertise to meet increasing demand for innovation. The second initiative, the Fit for Purpose program, offers a pathway for regulatory acceptance of dynamic tools in drug development programs. To date, 4 applications have been granted a Fit for Purpose status. In the following slide, I will delve deeper into the MIDD Paired Meeting Program to illustrate its impact further. Initiated as a pilot program following PDUFA 6 negotiations, this program has seen a consistent rise in the meeting requests from 2018 to 2022, as depicted in the top left figure. These meetings span a wide array of topics across Phase 1 to Phase 3 clinical programs. Some discussions focus on identifying appropriate dosing for patients or specific patient subgroups, while others aim to optimize clinical trial designs and streamline development process. As shown in the 2 bottom left figures, a variety of modeling and simulation techniques have been applied across multiple therapeutic areas, including oncology, neurology, cardiology, and others. The 2 publications on the right present perspectives from both agency and industry on how this program enhances new drug development. The knowledge and insights gained through our reviews and research projects are consistently distilled into new policies and guidances to enhance future drug development. The current guidances related to model-informed drug development are structured in 4 ledgers. The top ledger, ICH M15, contains the general principles for MIDD. The second ledger includes specific modeling approach guidances, such as population PK, exposure response, and PBPK format and content. The third ledger covers sections in clinical pharmacology guidances, providing detailed instructions on how quantitative tools can support clinical pharmacology studies. And the fourth ledger addresses the general application of quantitative tools across various therapeutic areas. These guidances are developed either from the findings using various quantitative medicine approaches or promote the application of these tools in specific areas of drug development. It is to note that the guidances in layer 3 and 4 are provided as examples. They're not a complete list of relevant guidances. Well, the examples provided demonstrate how our new policies have reshaped drug development programs across various disease areas. For instance, the guidance on efficacy extrapolation from adults to pediatric patients aged 2 years and older for drugs treating partial onset seizure is impactful. It offers a more efficient pathway for developing treatments for partial onset seizures in young patients, eliminating the need for additional clinical efficacy safety trials in this age group. Another example involves applying PK-based criteria to support alternative dosing regimens for oncology patients receiving PD-1 or PD-L1 blocking antibodies. This approach facilitates faster drug development and is particularly crucial for protecting vulnerable patients from infectious diseases like COVID-19. A third instance is in Alzheimer's disease, where evidence from multiple clinical trials supports using reduction of beta amyloid plaque as a reasonably likely surrogate endpoint. This allows earlier patient access to treatments intended to alter the underlying disease progression. Beyond the implementation of new policies, quantitative tools are extensively utilized in the Office of Clinical Pharmacology to foster innovation in our daily review process. These tools are frequently employed to support dose optimization and in certain reviews to aid in selecting endpoints, identifying patient subgroups, and facilitating pediatric extrapolation. Additionally, quantitative findings from modeling simulation may provide substantial or confirmative evidence for drug approvals. Modeling simulation are also used to assess feasibility of repurposing existing compounds for new indications. Commonly, these quantitative approaches support alternative dosage strategies, new route of administrations, and development of new formulations. Routinely, modeling simulation underpin approval and dose selection for compounds developed under the animal rule. During new drug development stage, these tools are crucial for enhancing clinical trial designs and quantifying biomarkers. We anticipate these trends will persist and expand with the establishment of Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence. This center will enhance our capabilities, promoting the use of quantitative tools to streamline new drug development, thereby accelerating the delivery of effective treatments to patients. Additionally, it will foster increased collaboration with both internal and external stakeholders, providing further opportunities to broaden our scope and implement more innovative tools. As you can see, the ship is leaving the harbor. We, the Office of Clinical Pharmacology, are ready to advance into the next phase of quantitative medicine. We eagerly anticipate the opportunities that the Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence will bring to all of us, all for the benefit of our patients. With that, I will conclude my presentation today. I extend my thanks to our leaders for driving these changes and making the idea of a Center of Excellence a reality. This represents a significant milestone, underscoring the value of quantitative medicine in drug development and patient care. I'm confident that the establishment of the center will enhance our collaborations within FDA and with the broader community, ultimately benefiting patients. Last but certainly not least, I want to thank you, our audience, for your attention.
Thank you so much, Hal. So next, we're going to hear about quantitative medicine innovations in the generic drug program from Dr. Robert Leinberger from the Office of Generic Drugs.
Hello, everyone. I'm Robert Leinberger, the Director of the Office of Research and Standards in the Office of Generic Drugs, and I'm here today to share some of the innovations in quantitative medicine that have been happening in the generic drug program. Modeling and simulation is not new to the generic drug program. So I've been at the FDA in the Office of Generic Drugs for 20 years, and I want to give some historical perspective on what we've been doing. Initially, we've had a lot of success using modeling and simulation to advance the bioequivalent science for systemically acting drugs. And this led to changes in the way applicants submit generic drug studies and help make the review of generic drugs more efficient. And because of this, about 10 years ago, when the Office of Generic Drugs underwent a significant reorganization as part of the establishment of new user fee programs for generic drugs, the Office of Generic Drugs established a division of quantitative methods and modeling in my office, the Office of Research and Standards, to really amplify and focus our efforts in modeling and simulating quantitative methods for generic drugs. And some of the things that we in the Office of Generic Drugs find very valuable about the modeling and simulation approaches are reflected in the core teams that we have in this division. And just outline them. So you can see that they're a little bit different in focus than you might see in some of the CDER's new drug programs. So we have one area of focus, which is locally acting, mechanistic models for locally acting products such as topical, inhalation, nasal, and ophthalmic and implanted routes of administration. These are routes of administration that are very challenging for the generic industry to develop and CDER to review generic drug applications. So focusing on the modeling and simulation aspects that help provide access to these complex generics is very important. We have a quantitative clinical pharmacology team that focuses on pharmacometrics models for bioequivalence studies and using PK/PD and exposure response relationships and analysis to help the generic drug program identify what perhaps is the clinically relevant bioequivalence standard for a particular drug. We have an oral absorption modeling team that focuses on models of the GI tract and drug absorption for systemically and locally acting drugs. Again, the vast majority of generic products are tablets and capsules. So this group handles the modeling and simulation related to those type of products. And we also have a very innovative data science and machine learning team that focuses on using machine learning, large language models to make the generic drug program more efficient through leveraging access to large data sets and helping translate that information into actionable programmatic accomplishments. But this group over the past 10 years has been very, very innovative. And I just want to give just a little bit of the sense of the type of innovative work that goes on in the generic drug program because of them. For our locally acting PPK models, I think one of our key accomplishments has been a set of grant programs over the last 10 years that have supported the development and availability of PPK models for these different local routes of action that are incredibly important to the generic industry and FDA's review of generic products. And here, through our grant programs, we've been able to fund the development of these models, develop data sets to help validate them. And this has resulted in the commercial availability in many of the leading software programs around PPK modeling of modules or methods for these different local routes of action. And this is, I think, very valuable to generic companies that are developing these products, but they're also extremely valuable to our FDA review scientists who have to review applications in these areas. And we found that these types of models are critical to access to generic versions of inhalation, topical, ophthalmic, and nasal products. And we have many generic versions of these complex products that are now approved without in vivo bioequivalence studies because the modeling and simulation helps us understand the critical attributes of the product and the risks of in vitro-based approaches for these products or waivers of in vivo studies. So incredibly impactful program here that's resulted in supported the development of fundamental infrastructure in these areas for the generic industry. Another innovative area related to this is in the use of computational fluid dynamics. So this is something that's, not so commonly used in CDER's review of drug development because most of the focus is on the clinical aspects. But mechanistic models for lung deposition and airflow and inhalation devices are incredibly important to the development and review of generic inhalation products. And so we've supported through grant programs the development of computational fluid dynamics models and the integration of them into our review thinking and the product development for these particular applications. Again, these physics-based models are not new science. They're widely used in industry, even in other parts of FDA. They're used extensively in CDRH for device evaluation, but the really innovative use in drug product development has been driven by our actions here because of our interest in the product factors rather than the clinical factors. Now, that's driven a lot of the innovation in these mechanistic models in the generic drug program, that in many new drug programs, there's, again, more of a pharmacometrics approach where there's lots of data, clinical data sets available. And efficient generic drug program developments generally can get more value out of mechanistic modeling that might provide alternatives to doing in vivo studies. And so that's why a lot of the innovation in the generic program has been focused heavily on the more mechanistic model-based side of quantitative medicine. And I think this is an important aspect of the Center for Quantitative Medicine and bringing these innovative approaches to a wider CDER audience. Some of the other innovative things that some of our other groups have been involved in the machine learning area, we've developed methods for the predictions of future ANDA submissions and demonstrated the value of machine learning approaches to trying to predict FDA's workload. These types of approaches now are used to help CDER estimate what our workload will be in the future, and there are groups in CDER that use these type of approaches to adjust the user fee programs based on predicted workload in the future. But our group was very innovative in sort of advancing this approach and trying to develop it. We've also looked at ways that we can make our review process and guidance development process more efficient, more consistent by looking at natural language tools to help extract information from drug labels across large data groups. And we've also used machine learning approaches to help develop other types of models more effectively. So machine learning based approaches to pharmacometrics model selection example, and to try to make modeling approaches more accessible and usable by broader parts of the generic drug industry. Some of our global harmonization efforts that are ongoing through the ICH M13 process, which is a harmonization for the bioequivalence methods for generic products, has been really strongly supported and driven by our modeling approaches. So models for food effect and fed bioequivalence studies have really helped us identify places where there's opportunities for harmonization that results in more efficient global generic drug development programs. And again, this is another way that our scientists in the Office of Generic Drugs use modeling and simulation approaches to help develop new opportunities for making our regulatory programs more efficient. And just a specific example with a literature site here about one of the first topical products that was approved without a clinical bioequivalence study because of the use of a PBK model for dermal absorption. And this model is really critical to supporting the applicant's proposal of an alternative approach to an in vivo clinical study. And so the applicant has allowed us to release some of the details of this. So there's a publication available that talks about how the model was used in the context of that specific use. It's published in 2021. But even in the current year, this has become much more widespread that there are 20 topical products last year that are approved via in vitro only approaches. again, no clinical studies needed. So again, the modeling really helps us understand what those critical attributes of the products are that allow us to rely on in vitro approaches. And this compares to if we, just to see the impact of this on how many generic products are available to the American consumer, right? 20 products were approved via the in vitro approach. Only 2 products approved based on very expensive clinical endpoint bioequivalence studies in FY23. So again, you have a tenfold increase in availability of generic products when you use modeling and simulation to help develop and support more efficient bioequivalence approaches. And this is one of the key impacts of. And again, these innovations were all developed through support of the generic drug user fee program to help aid access to generic versions of pharmaceutical products. However, these are strong, fundamentally science-based approaches that are certainly more broadly useful. And through the Center for Excellence in Quantitative Medicine, we look forward to sharing this experience across CDER and across the pharmaceutical stakeholders as well to learn from these type of innovative approaches, which sometimes have a different perspective than things that are important for new drug development. Again, a much stronger focus on the mechanistic base aspects and the formulation-based aspects, because again, generic products, same active ingredient, maybe a different formulation. So there's a much more focus on some of those aspects than in new drug development and looking at models for clinical studies and evaluations. But we have a lot more innovations in the pipeline, and I want to share 2 of them before the end of this talk. So one is our model-informed evidence meeting pilot. So in the generic program, what we mean by model-informed evidence is this is a novel bioequivalence approach that's more efficient than what we're currently recommending because it combines some sort of pre-specified modeling approach with then data that will be collected in vivo and in vitro studies. And this meeting pilot allows applicants to meet with FDA scientists to identify and discuss and refine that model before they conduct the in vivo studies. So they have a much higher likelihood that a novel approach will be accepted and lead to a more efficient approval place. And so we have a link here to the pilot program. We encourage generic drug applicants who are interested in using modeling approaches to use this pilot program to help get feedback early in their planning to use innovative modeling approaches in generic drug development. And so just an example of this might be there are some long-acting injectable products that have 3-month dosing intervals, and they're used continuously. These products not really safe for healthy subjects. You can't give a healthy subject a drug for 3 months that they don't need. Patients really can't be washed out between tested reference products because they're used continuously. Our old thinking for bioequivalence is a steady state bioequivalence study. Might take several years. Not really going to happen or lead to access to affordable options. Model-informed evidence approaches are there ways that you can switch products before steady state using model-based corrections for the previous exposure and have much more efficient study designs that still use the modeling approaches to fit and extract the comparison between the test and reference product from different types of data. And these are the types of innovative approaches that we would like to see in our model-informed evidence pilot programs. Second big innovation in the pipeline is what we call a model master file. And so as we think about the infrastructure for modeling, and we see a future in which modeling will be used much more widely across the generic drug industry, we want to be able to do this in a much more efficient way. And thinking about a model master file, it's sort of analogous to a drug master file. So in the generic program, there's a separation between product developers and the manufacturers of the drug substance. And drug substance supplier can supply multiple applicants. And so thinking about the modeling, we think of an idea where there's an ecosystem for model development. So models are not just for applicants with in-house expertise who then put that in their application. It's really that you have the ability to reach out to suppliers and a supply chain of models and use them in your application. A model master file allows that model development to be separated from the application and to be reused so that multiple applicants might be able to reference the same model. Once a model's been accepted by FDA, more people might then be amenable to using that and including that in their application. So it has the possibility of scaling up the approach. And this is an important aspect of the infrastructure for an effective modeling and simulation approaches. This is something that's new and under development. So we have a workshop coming up in a few weeks. It will be a 2-day workshop really walking through how the system can work, some of the applications, how it might be used to make modeling and simulation more accessible across the wide range of the generic industry. But we think this approach, again, also will be very valuable toward any pharmaceutical sponsor that might want to reuse models in the future. And so with that, I think the experience of the generic drug program is that quantitative medicine, modeling and simulation approaches, has really strongly supported innovation and access to equivalent products without unneeded clinical studies. And through the Center of Excellence, we really hope to share this experience more broadly across CDER and across the pharmaceutical industry. So thank you all very much for your interest in the Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence.
Next up, we will hear about the role of biostatistics in quantitative medicine from Dr. Stella Grosser from the Division of Biometrics 8 in the Office of Biostatistics within the Office of Translational Sciences.
I'm Stella Grosser, a Division Director in the Office of Biostatistics in OTS. Today, I will talk about the role of the Office of Biostatistics in CDER's quantitative medicine activities, and also going forward within the Center of Excellence that we're introducing today. So, I tell people that we're starting this center and the biostat is involved, and it's confusing because in some sense, everything that we do is quantitative, right? From designing studies to analyzing data to drawing inferences. But the bigger picture is our mission and vision. We aim to protect the public health by applying statistical approaches, and we play a central role in promoting innovative science-based quantitative decision-making throughout the drug development life cycle. So since the center's point is to leverage data to advance drug development and improve patient care, as we would like to do across the center, and specifically it's part of our mission and vision, let me describe some of what the office brings. So within quantitative medicine related PDUFA initiatives that have been going on for several years now, the Office of Biostatistics plays an important role in model-informed drug development and fit-for-purpose reviews. You can think of MIDD as a regulatory tool. And the idea is that it's an application of exposure-based biological and statistical models to facilitate drug development and decision-making. As a regulatory tool, it's useful to promote early interaction between drug developers and the FDA on key issues. MIDD leverages the strengths of several disciplines, both clinical pharmacology and statistics. We work on all aspects. Both disciplines may work across the board, but statistics brings its own strengths to the table. We are good at separating exploratory data analysis from confirmatory and from inferential work there. We know how to detect signal in the noise, signal versus noise, sometimes through advanced statistical tools, modern statistical methods, computer-intensive methods. We work hard at distinguishing association from causation, and we promote appropriate interpretations thereof. Under the Fit for Purpose initiative, we provide a pathway, the center provides a pathway for regulatory acceptance of certain dynamic, ever-evolving drug development tools for use in development programs. The evolving nature of these tools is such that we can't provide qualification or formal qualification through other established pathways. So we have established this sort of fit for purpose approach. The determination is made publicly available in an effort to facilitate greater utilization of these tools in drug development programs. So the types of models we have seen submitted to fit for purpose reviews are statistical models and disease models. Disease models are mechanistic in some sense. They simulate the progression of a disease over time. But the Office of Biostatistics is going to focus on the statistical models used to analyze and interpret data from experiments or clinical trials. And again, to quantify these relationships, assess the significance of observed effects, and make predictions based on the data that we see with submissions. Maybe it's easier to understand some of these with the 4 that we have determined as fit for purpose. And so these are FDA endorsed for use in research or drug development. That started about 10 years ago. The first one was in Alzheimer's disease. There's more of a disease model compared to placebo. And that was a critical path submission. It's worked over the years now through statistical methods such as Bayesian optimal interval, dose finding, or Boyne designs. That was an academic that Professor Yuan submitted. Pfizer most recently submitted another statistical method, empirically based Bayesian Emax models. This purpose was to improve dose finding in clinical trials. It characterizes the relationship between drug efficacy and a dosage level, working with a sort of a pre-specified prior, and the agency accepted it. We recommend that future sponsors who intend to use the proposed tool should explore the performance of the proposed methodology. So this was reviewed by a team of statisticians and clinical pharmacologists. The Biostat took the lead on this because of its heavily statistical nature. There are other quantitative medicine collaborations throughout the center. We work together on guidance and policy. For example, there's been a lot of efforts to model and simulate situations to determine bioequivalence for narrow therapeutic index drugs. And we're working on international harmonization of criteria. Product-specific guidances also, especially in the generic space, come from clinical considerations, or mechanistic considerations, and sometimes it's a combination of statistical and mechanistic thinking with cross-office collaboration. So, for example, we issued a product-specific guidance a couple of years ago for levonorgestrel IUDs. And I have a picture of the Federal Register notice. This particular collaboration also ended up with a nice paper published in AAPS on applications of modeling and simulation to identify a shortened study duration and a novel bioequivalence metric. So it was contributed to a much more efficient and but equally rigorous way to determine or to evaluate the equivalence of these products. We've have a active regulatory science research program going on, and as Rob Lineberger has described, involving multiple offices and disciplines, as well as some external stakeholders, both from industry, academia, who bring different perspectives to this work and to this sort of research. So there are current and future opportunities from the establishment of this center. I can think of a few offhand. In rare diseases, we have, because they're rare, small samples, limited number of patients, limited number of products. It's ripe for both statistical and mechanistic modeling to result in innovative trial designs, because you can incorporate somehow, and that's the challenge, I guess, the quantitative aspects of these, especially the inborn error diseases, where you know what's wrong on a molecular level, but how does that translate into clinical effectiveness and how to improve the health of these patients. So it's some of both, and I think there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of work that already has been done in quantitative medicine for these patients. AI and ML is also an active area that we're sort of getting our feet wet in. There's been work in machine learning and drug safety to identify health outcomes, identify risk factors for opioid prescribing, create frameworks for non-randomized observational studies using large databases. It's sort of the flip side of the rare disease problems. And again, this calls for collaboration across disciplines and discussions with our external partners as well. Sometimes we feel, or I feel like we're tilting against the sort of siloed nature of CDER, where this group is doing work in quantitative medicine that's similar to work that group is doing, only the groups are far down on different branches of the org chart, and we learn about each other's work when something gets published or something gets used in a review in a very innovative way. But I'm personally hopeful that this Center of Excellence in Quantitative Medicine, I'm excited that it could be a mechanism to break down some of these silos so that we leverage data to advance improved patient care. We bring together different perspectives and expertise, and we make progress on difficult questions. We meet emerging regulatory and, again, that public health needs of the patients and the American public. So thank you very much, and I'm hopeful that I look forward to your questions and a discussion.
Thank you all for those great presentations to start us out. I want to now open for our discussion with our panel from FDA on charting the course, CDER perspectives on quantitative medicine opportunities. Before we get started, I would like to remind you to put your questions in the Q&A box if you have those. We will try to answer as many as we can. I would like to welcome our moderator for this session, Dr. Assam Zaneh, who's the Director of Office of Clinical Pharmacology here at FDA and is currently serving as the board chair for the Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence. I'd also like to introduce our panelists, who all serve as executive board members for the COE. So we have Dr. Stella Grosser, who we just heard from the Office of Biostatistics, Dr. Chi Liu, who is the Associate Director for Innovation and Partnerships in the Office of Clinical Pharmacology, Dr. Nikolai Nikov, Director of the Office of Immunology and Inflammation in the Office of New Drugs, Dr. Bhagwan Reggie, the Division Director for biopharmaceutics in OPQA1, the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, Dr. Jim Smith, Director of the New Drug Policy in the Office of New Drugs, and finally, Dr. Liang Zhou, Director of the Division of Quantitative Methods and Modeling in the Office of Research and Standards in the Office of Generic Drugs. And I'll now turn it over to Dr. Zane.
Thank you, Daphne. I'm just doing a sound check. Am I okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. It's a true pleasure to kick off with the panel here, and thank you to the previous speakers for setting the stage. What we wanted to do was bring together a broad swath of leadership from across CDER that has various experiences in the quantitative medicine space, all throughout the regulation of drugs throughout their life cycle. And so what I want to do is to ask individuals to just take a minute or two to respond to what they heard, any aspects of what they heard. And I'll also be posing specific questions. And also, please do continue to populate the Q&A. We hope to get to your questions, if not in the context of the roundtable itself later in the day, or through our frequently asked questions, which we're formulating. So I want to start with Dr. Nikolov. One of the main interests, of course, is pushing quantitative approaches into drug development and regulatory evaluation. You have a lot of experience in this space. I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about your experience with incorporating quantitative medicine, for example, classical pharmacometrics and other approaches into the evaluation of new drugs. How do you think about applying new science and decision making in general in an area that has arguably historically been conservative? And so if you can either react to that question or what you've heard today, thank you for leading us off.
Sure. Thank you, Sam, and thanks everyone for giving me the opportunity to participate as a panelist. I also want to share that I'm excited to be a part of this new initiative of the Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence, and contribute my knowledge, expertise, and the experience that we've had over the years to the broader audience, and leverage that expertise, which I think is probably one of the most important ways to implement more broadly some of the successes that we've had, and also convince more skeptical audience about these opportunities. I think that perhaps most people are familiar with the use of quantitative medicine in early drug development, such as during dose exploration, exposure response assessments of safety and effectiveness or efficacy. However, there have been many other applications of these methods that have been successfully employed also in later drug development, including in marketing applications. And to better illustrate this point, I can share one example. In October last year, FDA approved an IV formulation and dosage of secukinumab for 3 indications: the treatment of adult patients with active psoriatic arthritis, active ankylosing spondylitis, and active non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis. And the clinical pharmacokinetics, or PK, efficacy and short-term placebo-controlled data were available from clinical studies in 2 of these indications. However, the IV dosage that was utilized in these trials resulted in exposures significantly higher than those for the approved subcutaneous regimens for those indications. And that resulted in exposures for which we had very limited safety data, particularly long-term exposure with the chronic dosing. And to address this important limitation, we employed model-informed drug development approach to leverage all the available clinical PK safety and efficacy data from the secukinumab development program to identify a maintenance IV dosing that better approximated the relevant subcutaneous exposures for which efficacy and safety have been established for these 3 indications. And as a result, the MIDD analysis were used to support approval of the new IV dosing regimens that were not directly studied in the indications that were sought for licensure. And the application of this quantitative medicine approach provided sort of an alternative path for drug development without the need to conduct additional and potentially unnecessary clinical studies. I just want to caveat this, that this approach was possible because we had a lot of information on the PK characteristics of the product, a lot of information with the subcutaneous and IV dosing regimen, and extensive clinical experience and PK data available with a to-be-marketed formulation. So I think there are different approaches and uses of quantitative medicine that can be leveraged to streamline drug development and potentially eliminate the need of unnecessary studies. So I'll pause here. I don't know if that addresses your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nikolov. Yes, it does. And I think what we'll do is at the end, maybe come back to talk a little bit more broadly about, you know, what is sort of the range of responses we get in the evaluation among staff, you know, in the evaluation of these various approaches in the new drug side and the generics or follow-on therapeutic space, and how do we see maybe the COE playing a role in allaying some of those concerns, ensuring consistency, some of the some of the things that stakeholders have identified and we ourselves have identified as opportunities. I do want to build on that motivating example and move to Dr. Grosser, who had give a really nice kind of overview presentation, talked a little bit about statistical approaches and quantitative decision making, incorporating knowledge of biology that interplay with pharmacological modeling, natural history of disease, many potential applications. Can you provide more specifics or an example of how this is being done in the regulatory setting? We heard Dr. Nikolov talk about data needs, and you know, I guess I'm of 2 minds. On the one hand, quantitative medicine approaches can play a huge role in data-rich areas where we have a tremendous amount of data, and then arguably on the other side, the need might be where we actually don't have a whole lot of data and we need to sort of fill knowledge gaps through quantitative approaches and mechanistic approaches. So maybe you can provide a bit of an example or your thinking in that regard.
Yeah, sure. You know, as I mentioned in my talk, there's the whole rare disease space, which is working on establishing procedures and frameworks. But one that I can think of offhand that's out there now is the pediatric extrapolation framework, where there's a sense of what data is needed, what knowledge is needed in terms of the biology and the pharmacology that relates pediatrics to adult disease courses. There's information out on the web on ICH E11 pediatric extrapolation that sets up this framework. If things are consistent, if things are known, then a full clinical trial is not needed. If with less information and less consistency across these different pieces of extrapolating, then discuss with the agency, then figure out what can happen. But this has been pretty successful in the recent past. So, and I'm also interested in hearing from Dr. Jal on how information would be integrated in the generic space, given that, you know, the whole model integrated evidence process is just taking off. And I think that keyword there is the integration. So thank you.
Thanks, Stella. That's a great sort of segue. I want to make one point, and then I do want to move to Dr. Zhao for perspective. It seems to me, and I see some kind of comments in the chat, that some way to kind of aggregate the experience around quantitative medicine in terms of case studies or precedents would be value added. Some of what we are trying to do is to ensure that the approaches that we've applied in one therapeutic area are actually portable across multiple therapeutic areas, disease contexts, development contexts. And sometimes the thing that's limiting us is a knowledge of precedents across those various therapeutic areas. And so we do hope to survey, as Dr. Matabushi mentioned, a significant kind of knowledge management component that then enables and empowers those kinds of decisions to be made. So I want to pivot to Dr. Zhao, who, as Dr. Leinberger showed, a lot of the innovation, wonderful innovation in the generic space is coming out of your shop. So maybe you can actually respond to Stella's question around, or the talks that you've heard at a high level. And I'd also be interested, your group in OGD has been very forward-looking in terms of supporting and conducting regulatory science research in the quantitative medicine space, broadly defined. And that's critical research that then informs a variety of important activities. So it'd be interesting to hear from you, what role have community scientists been playing in advancing quantitative medicine, and what kind of mechanisms for interaction do you think have been helpful in facilitating those kinds of engagements between FDA and the community?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Isam. It's really a privilege to address the critical role that a community scientists play in advancing the field of quantitative medicine and the mechanisms that enhance interactions between FDA and these valuable community contributors. Just before that, I want to address Dr. Grosser's question regarding model like knowledge integration. I really second her last slide showing that we need to break the silo and break the walls and expand the areas. So I have had a career in new drug before transition to the generic drugs. I really feel that we shouldn't differentiate new drug, generic drug, and a mechanistic model, empirical model too much. We really want to build the model together, and based on the need, we just tap into the information that can give the best value creation. For example, for new drugs, mainly on the clinical application to assess the benefit risk, what would be the dose, the optimal dose. For generic drugs, we have been developing lots of innovative tools to understand the drug delivery. I think drug delivery is also mechanistic, as Dr. Leinberger has presented earlier. So if we kind of integrate both drug delivery and the pharmacological action along with a statistical understanding of the uncertainty, that will be a big scientific merger, I will say, that will generate tremendous values for the field. I think the quantitative medicine will be a value and a platform to do that. Now I want to come back to Isam's question, how to engage. We have engaged community scientists. Actually, community scientists have been instrumental in propelling the field quantitative medicine forward. Mainly, there are two roles that we have appreciated. The number one role from community scientists, their innovation and fresh perspectives. Community scientists often bring new ideas, the innovative approaches for complex problems. The fresh perspective help to challenge the status quo, to drive the evolution methodologies. Secondly, they have a diversity of expertise. They come from various backgrounds and disciplines, contributing a rich diversity of knowledge that enhance the multidisciplinary nature of quantitative medicine. For example, as you can see from Dr. Lamberger's presentation, we have integrated computational fluid dynamics models with PBPK approach. And we also have been pioneering introducing different AI and machine method into the field of pharmacometrics and advanced science of drug delivery. That's kind of we benefited from a diversity of the community scientists. We have engineers, we have engineer stakeholders to enable us to integrate the computation fluid dynamics model, for example. As the roles explained, we also have established some mechanisms for community scientist engagement and collaboration. First, workshops and symposiums. We have organized the joint workshops and symposiums with the experts in the field and discuss their pain points and new trends, best practices, and explore collaborative research opportunities. Secondly, we have established some new regulatory mechanisms, like in Dr. Lamberg's presentation, we have the model integrated pilot program to discuss overcoming challenging issues that can be a showstopper in the development. We also have, for example, the use of model integrated approaches for BE establishment is increasingly prevalent, particularly in the development of challenging products such as long-acting injectables, orally inhaled drug product, and the topically applied dermatological product. So therefore, industry wants to seek FDA's feedback, and then we established the model integrated evidence meeting pilot. The second case is the new regulatory mechanism is more like a model master file. The model master file is a framework aimed at model sharing and model reusability. Similar to drug master files, model master file can be referenced by multiple applications for a similar purpose of use, thus improving model sharing, model standardization, and the regulatory consistency and efficiency. To enable this implementation, we certainly need to engage all the stakeholders, all the community scientists within and outside FDA. In May 2nd, 3rd, as Dr. Ramberger already mentioned in his presentation, we will conduct another workshop on this topic. The purpose of the workshop to engage all the stakeholders and among model developers, industry, and FDA in a discussion on the concept, scope, and the regulatory application of model master file. I would encourage everyone to register to the workshop if not yet. Third, we do have partnership building. Establishing partnership with academic institution, industry, and other stakeholders is the key. For example, the Center for Research on Complex Generics is a perfect example that we have under the leadership as established with the University of Maryland to engage stakeholders for various venues. This partnership ensures that research is not only innovative, but also aligned with the practical need in the regulatory setting. Lastly, I think we also have a fellowship and internship program to engage the community scientists in the form of ORAS fellows, sabbaticals. They are the two major means for community members to directly involved and understand the regulatory landscape. I want to also share a last point, open innovation challenges. By leveraging the GDUFA regulatory science program in terms of grants contracts to crowdsource solutions for specific quantitative method modeling, challenges faced by the FDA, the challenges can stimulate community involvement and innovation, bridging a wide array of solutions to complex issues. In conclusion, the synergy between FDA and community scientists fosters a dynamic, productive environment in quantitative medicine. It's imperative that we continue to nurture these relationships through robust, open, collaborative channels to further enhance our capabilities and ultimately improve public health outcomes. I think it's a kind of a lengthy answer, but I appreciate Isam, you gave me the opportunity to share our thought experience. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Excellent response. And just a few things I'd like to point out that resonated with me that we could think about, because I know we'll have sort of external community partners in the next panel, and maybe homework for the many hundreds of people who are online, thinking about how they, in their organizations, could connect with the center. And a few things come to mind. One is, at least on the research side, you mentioned something about understanding the practical need in the regulatory setting. I think this is critical because in academia, for example, there's just tremendous capability to do exceptional science. And sometimes what's missing is that orientation towards the specific drug development or regulatory challenge. And if there's a way that we can sort of connect with partners in those organizations so that the most relevant science is being done that, if accomplished, will push the field forward, seems like a very worthwhile thing to think about. Also, you mentioned this, crowd-based approach to solutions. I really love that idea of crowdsourced innovation. And so one of the hopes of the center is to think about innovative models and mechanisms for precisely that. How do we leverage a broader community's expertise to bring the best capacities and capabilities to bear the leading methodologies forward, and do it in an efficient way that answers the practical questions. So again, the sky's the limit in terms of people's imaginings around what's possible here, both in terms of organizational models and collaboration models, as well as impact. I want to keep in the theme of kind of stakeholders and partnerships and move to Dr. Chi Lu, who's been working in quantitative medicine for many years with experience ranging from drug development and review to policy development to strategic partnerships. And I would love to hear from you on what your experiences have been to date in setting up these partnerships, and specifically, what are the keys, to establishing fruitful collaborations, fruitful partnerships, especially as it relates to, external entities, stakeholders.
Thanks so much, Isam. I'm really enjoying this conversation. And before I answer your question, I want to echo what you said and what Dr. Zhao said about importance of community scientists and the importance of collaboration. In my opinion, the key to success is to have a mission-driven strategic plan with clear priorities and goals. In 2021, Office of Clinical Pharmacology began the important task of formulating a 5-year strategic plan to define the priorities, goals, initiatives, and activities that will guide us in realizing our vision, which is to improve public health by building and translating knowledge of drug response into patient-centered regulated decisions of the highest quality. We developed 3 strategic priorities, and 2 of which are especially crucial to guide our innovation and collaborative efforts. Our strategic priority number 1 is to advance our science for the benefits of the patients, and quantitative medicine has been identified as a focal area. So with input from all stakeholders, we have increased our investment in model-informed drug development, including innovative methods such as mechanistic modeling and AI and machine learning. And this includes review, research, policy development, and education, for all of which we stress the importance of collaboration. So in the review space, our collaborative efforts have led to many breakthroughs, like identify biomarkers and surrogate endpoints for challenging disease, like Alzheimer's disease, like mentioned by Dr. Zhu earlier, and for ALS, like Dr. Cavazzoni mentioned in her opening remarks. And also the application of AI and machine learning to determine suitable populations for the emergency use authorization of anakinra, like Dr. Matabushi has mentioned in his presentation. And in the research space, we have many collaborative projects with other units within the FDA and the scientific community. For example, we have established research collaborations with academia, non-for-profit institutions, pharma as well as tech industry, projects covering a very wide range of topics, such as PPPK for pregnancy, real-world data modeling approach for dose optimization in older adults, disease progression models, simulations to facilitate clinical trials, and the application of AI/ML to advance precision medicine. Our office has also established a visiting scientist program inviting researchers from academia and non-for-profit institutions to collaborate directly with us, further enrich our scientific endeavors. And many of our research collaborations lead to policy development, and that greatly facilitates drug development, for example, pediatric extrapolation, QT evaluation, and the PK-based approach for alternative dosing regimens for biologics. And education is a catalyst to maximize the impact of scientific achievement, and we're very committed to support the continuous education for FDA staff as well as for our entire community. I want to mention that in collaboration with Critical Path Institute and leaders in the field, we have co-developed an MIDD training course tailored for a lung modeling audience. While the FDA staff were the target population for the initial offering of the course, we plan to make these resources freely available globally. And this initiative is expected to benefit the entire ecosystem, especially as the field of quantitative medicine continues to expand. I also want to briefly mention our office's second strategic priority, which is boosting patient-centered engagement. And we all know FDA is deeply committed to patient-focused drug development, emphasizing the importance of actively listening to patients' voice. For instance, our office has partnered with UCSF for a national survey to understand the perceptions and expectations of older adults with multiple chronic conditions regarding drug development and clinical trials. And patient engagement has also been a cornerstone of many of our recent initiatives, such as college dose optimization workshop series. And the insights gained from the patients serve as a guiding force in our efforts, ensuring that our work can positively impact patients' lives. And this direct feedback not only ensures the positive outcome for patients, but also motivates and empowers our staff. It energizes our collective drive to innovation and enhance our work. So in summary, I believe our strategic priorities, advancing our science for the benefits of the patients and bolstering patient-centered engagement, are crucial in guiding us towards successful collaboration and innovation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chi, and I couldn't agree more. It's probably about centering patients. It's probably worth mentioning that, you know, the quantitative medicine center, I mean, we emphasize and underscore medicine, I think, largely to ensure that all of the folks working in this space, both at FDA, within CDER, beyond CDER, and of course the partners who would be interested in engaging with us, understand that first and foremost, this is a patient-centric activity. So thank you for emphasizing that. I want to pose a similar question to Dr. Bhagwant Rege. First, you know, your office has been involved in many activities in quantitative medicine. I'm wondering if you could first maybe highlight some of those activities and then speak to many of them have to do with internal collaborations. Dr. Grosser mentioned, you know, siloing in her talk. Your group has done a really nice job sort of connecting multiple organizations within CDER, including our office, the Office of Clinical Pharmacology, the Office of Biostatistics, the Office of New Drugs, generics, all of the kind of players. So talk a little bit about your organization and then perhaps talk a little bit about the enabling factors that you have seen in overcoming barriers to collaboration. You are on mute.
Sorry about that.
Great.
All right. So first, let me talk about all the modeling and simulation activities that take place in Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. Some of them are within the scope of the new center and some of them are not. So we do have in traditional CMC space, process models and manufacturing space. We have stability models where You can predict stability from limited data and real-time release testing models. So all of those CMC type of modeling and simulation activities are not within scope. So what's within scope is the modeling and simulation activities that basically connect drug product quality to PK performance in patients and hence indirectly connected to clinical performance. Those are the biopharmaceutics models that are in scope. And we have been active in this space for many years. As you all know, IVC guidance was published in late 1990s, and we are still using that guidance. Applicants are submitting in vitro, in vivo correlations, potentially avoiding unnecessary bioavailability and bioequivalence studies. It also helps us set some patient-centric quality standards. And the newer approach that we are engaged in is physiologically based biopharmaceutics modeling, which is basically a subset of PBPK models that OCP and OGD they use for different purposes. We have fostered collaboration with both OGD, OPQ, also worldwide regulators, as well as academia and industry. We have organized numerous workshops to advance the science for PBBMs. Last year, in August, we had a big workshop where regulators from across the world presented case studies submitted by industry participants to discuss best practices in development, validation, and application of these models. Again, both to potentially avoid conducting bioavailability and bioequivalence studies, as well as setting patient-centric quality standards. One of the pain points that we frequently hear from industry is bridging between formulation. A pre-approval, there can be requirements for bridging when you are advancing your clinical development program, you're changing your formulation, and you want to make sure whatever formulation that you are advancing either to phase 3 or from phase 3 to commercial, especially the commercial product gives the same clinical performance as what was tested in clinical trials. And frequently the changes are such that we sometimes recommend they have to conduct bioequivalence studies. And it can sometimes slow down the clinical programs, can delay the availability of the much needed drug products to the patients. So we are actively investigating if modeling and simulation activities can potentially alleviate that concern. One of the things that enables us to collaborate with both OCP and OGD is that biopharmaceutics as a discipline is involved in review and assessment of both generic as well as new drug applications. So, and all these assessment activities are always team-based activities. So we're actively talking to our colleagues in OCP as well as OGD. The decisions that we make, one discipline makes a decision, it has impact on activities of another discipline. So we have to keep talking. So this basically is an enabling activity. Also, OCP and OGD, both of these offices have dedicated quantitative modeling and pharmacometrics teams who have done really foundational work in developing new models, new tools, and we are able to leverage that expertise. So that also is one of the enabling factors in terms of how we go about doing this. Some of the barriers that I see are we do collaborate, but it's sort of an unstructured collaboration because we collaborate when we have the need in terms of when the application comes in and when we talk about it and we make decisions. But every office has their own workload priorities, so it's not a structured collaboration. So with this establishment of this new quantitative medicine center, I'm hopeful that we'll have a proactive strategy for collaboration and communication. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I do want to just sort of point to two things that struck me that you said before moving on. First is one of the enabling factors being this kind of team-based approach to decision making. And the second piece being that several areas, offices, divisions, functional groups have expertise in these approaches. And so it's probably worth mentioning that, you know, the underlying principle of the Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence is to essentially maximize those two things, right? In part, which is form a sort of superstructure or a super team that allows for these interactions to happen at an enterprise level. And the second being to tap into that tremendous breadth and depth of expertise that we have distributed all over the center. And how can we bring people together to make very sound, science-based decisions in a consistent way that maximizes our knowledge, understanding, and efficiencies. So I think it's great that you pointed to those two things. The second piece I wanted to mention, you mentioned worldwide regulators, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that while the center is focused on synergies within CDER, the impacts are expected, of course, beyond CDER. And we do have collaborations with colleagues in other centers in FDA, including CDRH and CBER, the device side and the biologics side, as well as Dr. Hao Zhu showed the activities around the ICH global regulatory harmonization efforts, including ICH M15, which is focusing on synchronizing our regulatory expectations in model-informed drug development. So these are all the international regulatory community is expected to play a huge role in this sphere and has as well, and we look forward to those collaborations as well. So maybe that's a good launch point to talk about policy within CDER, and I welcome Dr. Jim Smith, who I've heard on many occasions say that science should lead the way when it comes to policy. And Jim, you run a major policy group in CDER, in OND in particular. It'd be great to hear from you how your group has tried to advance science-based policy development and implementation more generally, and how do you see the role for the Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence from the policy perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Isam, and thanks so much for having me. And I'm excited to be a part of this as this center launches. You raise a very good question, and you're absolutely right that I've said that, and I will continue to say that. Obviously, we need to operate within our applicable statutory and regulatory requirements and responsibilities. But within that, we are a science-based agency. And I think that our obligation to make the best regulatory decisions that we can in a science-based agency is to ground those applications in data and evidence, and quantitative medicine is a has been and will continue to be a very important part of that decision making. And so I think that as this center takes off, and as projects are developed and knowledge is shared, there will certainly be aspects that we will learn as we go, that there are particular policy needs to develop for more consistent application of innovative ideas that are being developed and applied. And our science and our lessons learned as we try new approaches, pressure test new approaches in a variety of situations where the facts might be a bit different, and we need to figure out to what extent is a particular method or approach generalizable or not. that should really guide where we then develop, where laying down new guidance or policy and whatnot for then increasing widespread application and hopefully consistent application. And the examples that have mentioned today so far that are already even not just within FDA but under international harmonization and collaboration are perfect. That's a really nice examples of taking that to then even the next level. I'm within the Office of New Drugs, but obviously decisions within the Office of New Drugs are very much multidisciplinary and involve many of the offices that are represented here today. And we are well aware that with so many clinical review divisions and clinical review offices within the Office of New Drugs, it's always an uphill challenge to try to ensure that the messages and approaches are penetrating far and wide, and we're getting feedback from various divisions about how they are approaching problems, how accepting or not accepting they may or may not be to different approaches. And I think that one of the elements, even though this is not policy per se, but it's incredibly important to any policy effort, are the plans around knowledge management, both internally and externally within this center. It's being such a large organization, individual teams that serve certain divisions, dealing with certain applications, can do really amazing work. And when that happens, we need ways to spread that knowledge and the lessons learned, so that other divisions are both aware of what we have done, what we precedent that may have been set, but and then also importantly, like as Nikolai was mentioning right at the outset of this discussion, in his example, there were very fact-specific, application-specific factors that led him to be particularly comfortable in a given situation, and we need to figure that out too. Sometimes it's too easy to paint with a broad brushstroke of saying, well, because this was done in this application, we ought to be able to do it in any application, and that's not necessarily true. We need to try to line up and see how similar are two different situations. And if they're very similar, then we ought to be taking similar approaches, unless we learned from a prior mistake or something that we may have done. But in general, we should be taking similar approaches to similar situations. The challenge is often identifying whether those situations are actually similar, and especially when we are exploring novel or innovative approaches, we might not yet know what are all the critical factors that led us to be comfortable with a particular application. And I think so as this center begins to share more knowledge and explore various approaches that we might be able to take, that will be, I think, in my view, a critical piece of this, because then if there are going to be follow-on guidance development or whatnot, it'll be very important to transmit that information about what are the limitations, what are the strengths, in what situations might this apply, and what situations might this not apply, so that we can be as transparent as possible, not only within our own organization, but also then very importantly with drug development sponsors and our external partners to help them go down these various paths. So hope that helps to kick things off.
Yeah, it really did, Jim. And I have several follow-up questions, but I will restrain. so I actually have maybe a question for you and others who are, let's say, trying to transmit, transparency around policy, that are trying to signal, sort of regulatory openness to new approaches. Because I think one of the things that you said is clearly sharing knowledge internally for consistency purposes, but also there's that external component, which I think is also rate limiting. Sometimes FDA gets, let's say, pinged for not being conservative, but in fact, I can think of many, many examples where we've sort of tried to push from the inside towards more innovative and streamlined approaches, but there's actually regulatory conservatism on the other side, on the part of, the drug development side of the house. And so my question for you, maybe Stella, Liang, others who have tried to kind of, transmit that we're sort of open for business in considering areas of innovation. What are some of the ways that you've done that? Maybe it's too early to tell if they've been successful or not, but I know with CID there are some disclosure mechanisms. I know various offices have taken various communication approaches, stakeholder engagement approaches. So maybe anyone could feel free to jump in and provide just high-level thoughts on that.
Well, I can start. Our office is more internal facing. We primarily support our review divisions, so I won't speak as much to the external piece. I'll let others do that. You're raising a very good question, Isam. We have found, at least as our, we're a relatively also new office, about 5 years in existence, but we have definitely, I think, planted a flag internally as a place that O&D review divisions can come for help, or to seek hey, are you aware of anyone having done XYZ before? Because we're facing this novel situation, and you all talk to a lot of review divisions, and so what can you help us find? And so perhaps it's the analogy of the old telephone switchboard operator isn't completely analogous, but I think we do have a growing and pretty robust awareness of some things that are happening on the ground, especially when they might be quite unique and or seemingly novel. And divisions might be a bit anxious about whether or not they would be setting a precedent that others need to be aware of, so they tend to come to us and ask questions. And so our office can often help connect one division with another who has been down that path before, and some of that internal knowledge sharing has been one way to do it. But that's at sort of the individual query level, right? I think that some of the efforts that the quantitative medicine COE with respect to knowledge management are, I think, hoping to accomplish might really facilitate this, right? And have folks have a more readily accessible way to identify whether certain folks have been down a path before or not. But I'll stop there and toss it to others who might also want to share views.
Thank you. That's great. Others care to opine on this question? Liang, looks like you've come off mute.
Okay, I will start. Just following Jim, because I feel so fortunate to have Jim here from policy perspective, following Isam's advocate for like an open forum, have more larger engagement, break the silos, bridge the communication between FDA and industry and consulting and other stakeholders. We can use a case of a model master file concept. So I think there are some limitations for the regulatory agency to be really open-minded. There could be unintended consequences when we are doing these things. We need to be sophisticated enough to anticipate all the up and downs. Certainly, there are so many benefits that for example, for the model sharing. So to enable a mechanism for model master file. So, but in the same time, we have so many policy and other even commercial interest considerations. For example, how can we manage the proprietary information? For example, some part of the information, even though it stimulates standardization and model sharing, but for some part of the information, what if the stakeholder doesn't want to share yet? So the model master file actually have a nature that it's only accessible to the FDA, to the agency. So I think for that thing, it's not a kind of a people are not aware of the nature of that yet. So I think we need to guarantee that the proprietary information can be protected, and also to increase the consistency, efficiency. We all large organizations. I think there are many big farmers in industry, and also FDA is very humongous, huge organization. There could be silos, like one reviewer have developed idea and have witnessed a good model, a good application, but the other reviewer may not have that chance or opportunity yet. How to synchronize or harmonize the recommendation now and in the future, and also based on the communication in the past. So we haven't, as a whole, I think the quantitative medicine center can also have some thought on that in terms of we can be open-minded, but how to do the knowledge-based management. I think the model master file can serve kind of part of the tool. Say the reviewer have developed some comment after great effort in understanding the package, the capacity of the model, and then the data used for model validation. How could that knowledge be shared, transferred across to other reviewers? And also in industry, if one model has been accepted for regulatory use, how could the other smaller firms or medium-sized firms can take also the advantage of innovation? So how could big firms reduce the effort in duplicating things, duplicating effort? I think the model sharing standardization in the format model master file really can provide some benefit. And also given the complex nature of the model, dynamic nature of the model, can a model be upgraded always easily? And then we need to have a mechanism if we want to launch initiative to take that into account, how to make the mechanism accommodate the dynamic nature of the model evolutions. So since the model, sometimes not a clear cut, can we allow people to refer a component of a model that being developed by others, but in the same time build it on top of that? I think that's highly technical, but if there's any open forum or initiative, we also need to be open-minded how to allow people to build on top of the existing knowledge. The other thing, I think we don't want to stifle any innovation. Probably one type model can serve one regulatory need, but we don't want to prohibit, okay, this is the only way to do it. There could be diverse ways to tackle on the same issue. We really want to stimulate innovative thought from all ends. We don't want to one model dominate the field, then that's it. For any new initiatives or mechanism we want to implement, we may want to take that into account. But certainly that all engage policy and other operational side of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll jump in here if you don't mind a bit.
Sure, please do.
As Isam mentioned, there's the complex innovative design initiative that was part of PDUFA, and that sets up a very clear legal framework for what FDA will accept and what the industry needs to make public. And it's been successful. I think there have been, timing issues in terms of drug development and how long it takes for designs to be accepted and when phase 3 studies need to begin. So that could serve as a model going forward for these models. I would say internally, part of so as Leong said, there's, it's a large organization. The Office of Biostatistics is large, and there's some unevenness in terms of openness to mechanistic modeling and how to incorporate that in our review with the standards of evidence that we expect and the rigor that we expect and the certainty and the detecting of that signal that we expect outside of what we consider traditional efficacy or safety measures at a patient level, at a population level. So there's education that needs to be done internally. I think that's real important. I think there needs to be development of standards of evidence for use of these models in regulatory decisions, and those could be statistical as well as biological, medical, pharmacological.
Thank you very much for that. I think it's a really nice highlight, all three of the last responses around priority areas for us: education, knowledge management, program development, initiative development. And we don't want to just use this sort of, I think the people in the public who we're hoping to engage with, I want it to be clear, we're not just thinking about how to engage along existing pathways, but thinking about how to establish new pathways. And then the component around education and clearly standards development, which would fit into our real desire for policy development and implementation, ensuring once that there's a sort of consensus approach, let's say an evidentiary framework for consideration of model credibility, how then can that be deployed across any office in CDER consistently? And that's one of the main goals. So I want to end with one final question, and for whoever is brave enough, there are some great questions in the chat, Q&A, and I would like to end this session with modeling sort of our transparency, and maybe you can talk a little bit about just raising questions about the COE, quantitative medicine COE, from your own staff. What are you hearing on the ground? What are the kinds of questions that need to be kind of addressed, clarified? Because I'm sure the questions that we are experiencing all throughout CDER are very relevant to the questions that are coming to us today. And so that will really help us formulate very clear responses so that we're all operating from the same point of departure. So who would be willing to? Okay, Chi, great.
Thanks, Isam. I think ever since the announcement of the COE come out, I received a lot of questions both internally and externally. Of course, the first one will be around the scope of the COE, and that has been addressed by this workshop. But another very common thing from the question is people want to know how can they contribute and how can they collaborate. And I wonder if you or anyone on the panel have any suggestions for them. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chi. And maybe we'll flush out some of these questions and raise them. And then if we have time on the back end, we may be able to touch a couple of them. So Stella, you're off mute. Did you have
Oh, I just hadn't gone back on.
Oh, okay.
But I think that just in terms of internal collaboration, what I have tried to push is an openness to, picking up the phone and saying, this is really interesting. We worked on something similar. This goes back to maybe a more uniform knowledge management where it doesn't have to be me picking up the phone. It, somehow we know that these people have worked on these things when this aspect and are interested and are open to talking to different disciplines across the center and across, the agency more generally. Yeah, but I will go back on mute.
Yep.
So
No problem. Thank you. Well, oh, Leon, go ahead.
Yeah, only one point to offer. I think
Sure.
all the feedback questions we all received can be incorporated into the functionality of different task forces. I think Raj mentioned in his presentation, one of the center action is to establish task forces. We certainly can accommodate some of the need and inquiries in terms of how to shape that. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, and we should, and those task forces are intended to be very nimble. That's one of the advantages of having the centers, to be able to sort of rapidly assemble expertise and experience in order to address rate limiting issues or emerging needs. So to that end, one of the things that I hope the community is thinking about is, what is the opportunities list? If you were going to kind of, I mean, that might be the homework at the end of today, is if you were hoping that FDA, that CDER in particular, would address certain policy, scientific, programmatic, regulatory issues, whatever the issue may be, we want to look at those, we want to vet those, and we want to assemble fit for purpose teams to address those. So that is something that, and I'm already seeing some ideas that are popping in the chat. Maybe in just the last 2 minutes, I'll address a couple of the points that were raised. One is, I think this is the key question that Chi raised, which is, what does this sort of, how do we engage? And the beauty of having this central point within CDER is that we do have a centralized point of contact with, over the next coming months, if people are interested in learning more or have ideas, that could come through those channels. And I believe Daphne has put that information up today, and if not, it's in the meeting material. So we are going to be working together to build out the community's priority needs. And then from there, once we've prioritized those, we can think about whether or not individual points of entry are required depending on what the program or the initiative is. The other piece is, what does this mean for me, right? Whether it's internal FDA staff or externally, and maybe the principles that we could just put out there and end with are, we want to be maximally disruptive in terms of innovation, but minimally disruptive in terms of workflows. And so, there are many, one of the basic approaches of the centers, there are many successful programs within CDER. There are many successful examples of collaborations. We want to learn from those and replicate those, not change and modify those. So if there are already existing programs, we're developing touch points with those programs. Luckily, we have many of the leaders that are on this executive board and throughout the center do sit on those committees and governances as well. So we expect not disruption, but synergy with those programs. And we'll address specific programs over the coming weeks as well to provide clarity. So with that, I think we're right on time. I want to thank the panelists for their carefully considered thoughts. I'd like to thank the audience as well for the questions and the attention, and I'll turn it back over to Daphne. Thank you.
Thanks, Assam, and thanks everybody on the panel. That was a great discussion, and we're really looking forward to our next panel. But before we get there, we're going to take a short break and resume at 11:30. So please do stay with us. We appreciate all of the attendees that have joined us so far this morning. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put those in the Q&A, and we'll also put up the contact information for the center. Our email is on the slide here. So we'll resume at 11:30. Thanks, everybody. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us back after the break. We're going to continue our discussion by inviting various stakeholders to comment on the needs, gaps, and opportunities in quantitative medicine. Next slide. I'd like to welcome back Dr. Raj Matabushi, who will be moderating this panel. I'd also like to invite our panelists for this session, Dr. Joga Gubaru, a professor from the University of Maryland, Baltimore, Dr. Dan Hartman, Director of Integrated Development at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Dr. Alyssa Lavange, Professor Emerita and former Chair of the Department of Biostatistics at the Gilling School of Global Public Health at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Dr. CJ Masante, Vice President of Scientific Research and Global Head of Pharmacometrics and Systems Pharmacology at Pfizer, and Dr. Stacy Tannenbaum, Vice President of Scientific Engagement at Meacham Research Group. I'll now turn it over to our moderator, Dr. Raj Matabushi.
Thank you, Dr. Gwynn, and welcome to all the panelists. In the morning session, we heard about the motivation for the formation of the center, some of the aspects associated with the center, and you also heard some perspectives from the key partners and participants in the center's initiative from within the agency. We will switch gears in this session and hear about some of the perspectives and opportunities that we may have ahead as we navigate the next phase of this center's related activities. So before we go ahead, maybe I would like to provide our panelists an opportunity for quick reactions based on what they have heard since the announcement of the center throughout the day so far, and what they are, how they are looking at it at a very high level, 1 to 2 minutes of quick reactions before we get into the specific panel discussion. Could I invite Dr. Misante to kick us off?
Sure. Thanks very much, Raj. And also, I want to congratulate CDER and yourself on the establishment of the Quantitative Medicine COE. This resonated with me quite a bit because it is something that we are also initiating within our organization as we've undergone many organizational changes and recognize the need to overcome perceived organizational barriers. And to harmonize approaches across the MIDD lines, including clinical pharmacology, pharmacometrics, quantitative systems pharmacology, statistics, and our preclinical modeling teams. It's also given us the opportunity to look across therapeutic areas to proactively anticipate needs and investments, to allocate resources accordingly, and then also to come together to develop best practices, share learnings and understandings, identify gaps, and also to minimize uncertainties. And finally, I'll just say that we're hopeful that it will also allow us to get in front of emerging disruptive innovations in this space as a collective quantitative line so that we can lead rather to react to these changes. So I believe it's a cultural shift. It will take time, but I also believe that we'll have a positive return on investment over time.
Thank you, Dr. Masante. Can I next request Dr. Gubaru?
Thank you for the opportunity. The establishment of the Center of Excellence for Quantitative Medicine marks a transformative step for the FDA, elevating the role of innovative quantitative approaches for bringing new treatments to patients more efficiently. So I would like to express my congratulations to Dr. Raj Matabushi, who's spearheading this effort, and also other leadership, particularly Dr. Issam Zineh, for supporting this initiative. So I wanted to reflect a little bit on the opportunities that may lay ahead of this Center for Excellence in QM. I think they are abound. And here is my perspective as a drug developer, pharma regulator, educator, and a consumer. And I want to bin these into 3 buckets. One is innovation, collaboration, and empowerment. In terms of innovation, this initiative allows us to reboot the type of questions that we're asking. The questions we asked 30 years ago are different from the questions that are pertinent today. We conquered, if you think about it, 30 years ago, comparing PK of 2 products was a big deal. We conquered with bioequivalence. 20 years ago, we wanted to focus on efficient ways to dose heterogeneous patient populations. We solved that using PK bridging and population PK analysis and such. Then we moved on to applying quantitative approaches to support evidence effectiveness and key labeling sections. And MIDD is a critical path in drug development now. And those who do not embrace it are left behind. However, the challenges now are different. Instead of sponsors thinking about regulatory process, about the COE, I encourage them to think about this strategically. What does it mean to them in the long run? Why can we not use model integrated evidence of effectiveness as the confirmatory evidence, the primary basis throughout the life cycle? Can we extend this approach to general indications, not just rare diseases? And can we also extend to CDER, CDRH as well? Can we ensure MIDD is applied consistently across the FDA organizations? Folks who are responsible for strategy at sponsor organizations, pharmaceutical companies, will benefit from this initiative. Quantitative approaches are key for individualizing treatments. And can we not design, informative patient trials that can inform precision medicine, precision pharmacotherapy? The patients will benefit from this type of initiative. Now, in terms of collaboration, the very fact that we are hosting, or FDA is hosting this workshop to seek feedback from stakeholders speaks to its openness for creating and strengthening the entire healthcare ecosystem, not just an internal organizational change. Finally, I wanted to touch upon the empowerment that is derived by creating this Center for Excellence. Empowerment of science and scientists. Let us not expect a resume already for a newborn. They just formed this center. Observing how innovative approaches were organizationally instilled at FDA, you will see that innovation around generic approval started in 80s, but it was not until 90s Office of Generic Drugs was formed. Innovation in quantitative approaches started in late 90s and early 2000. And a division for pharmacometrics was formed in 2007. And OGD's ORS was formed in 2014. Similar organizational empowerment occurred with genomics. And so most of those were grassroots revolutions. The way I see it with the Center of Excellence for QM, it's inspired, I'm assuming, by these successes and is more a top-down approach. I draw particular attention to the word medicine. I really like that choice of quantitative medicine, which they could have chosen modeling, research, science, and what have you, but they didn't. They chose medicine. This speaks volumes in terms of the empowerment of the Center of Excellence and what it will bring to innovation for patient-centric and decision-centric drug development. This visionary initiative by FDA not only underscores its leadership in healthcare regulation, but also demonstrates its commitment to advancing public health through innovation and collaboration. Congratulations to all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Goguru. Very inspiring words. can I move to Dr. Lavange for quick reactions?
Thank you very much, Raj. And I too would like to congratulate Dr. Cavazzoni, Dr. Zena, and Dr. Matabushi, you, Raj, and others in CDER's leadership for the formation of this Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence. This is a very exciting platform, I believe, to encourage cross-office collaboration and also to ensure that CDER keeps a laser focus on the use of computational tools and data sources to streamline and accelerate drug development and also regulatory review processes. I think the need for such a center is clearly there, with possibly the best examples coming from rare diseases, although I agree with Joga about not just looking at rare diseases, but going beyond others as well. I think the talent is clearly there. There are many reviewers within CDER that have superb quantitative skills. The reviewers in the Office of Biostatistics and the Office of Clinical Pharmacology, of course, is where the greatest concentration is, but that's not to exclude those in other offices as well. And I think the timing is right. Speaking from the academic side, academic research in machine learning, artificial intelligence, particularly predictive modeling and precision medicine, has really taken off. The academic research has in recent years. It's always a step ahead of research or usually a step ahead of research in industry. And as has been pointed out, the regulatory review lags behind even further because there has to be a lot of education and more general acceptance. But there have been a lot of exciting breakthroughs in academic research in the areas that do provide the foundation for much of the modeling and simulation that I think the center will be focused on. Similarly, the availability of very rich, large databases has increased, as well as the tools to better assess their quality, some of which is suspect due to the real-world data acquisition processes. But nonetheless, I think that those exciting the exciting progress in academia is there. And so I think the timing for this center is really right. A couple of specific comments I particularly liked from the previous session. One has to do with sharing the success stories with the public. I've also been looking at the Q&A from that session, and I think this is really important. Just as the complex innovative design and model-informed drug development PDUFA 6 initiatives were set up with public sharing, I think this center could really facilitate the communication, being a single place where people can go to hear the success stories, find out what tools are publicly available, fit for purpose approvals, things like that. And Dr. Leinberger spoke to the many successes, for example, in the Office of Generic Drugs, but the fact that those successes need to spread outside of OGD. Jim Smith in OND is aware of many of these. And I think that even though there's a big difference between generic and new drugs, there is often information about new drugs from the same class or previous indications that could be leveraged in a way that's not that dissimilar to things that happen in the generic world. So I like Dr. Leinberger's comments. One of the most or probably the most exciting aspect of this office for me, having been former director of the Office of Biostatistics, is the potential for inter-office or cross-office collaboration within CDER. And Dr. Grosser spoke to that previously in our Q&A. I'll have the opportunity to speak a little bit more. But I think this is particularly exciting, and the removal of the silos that Dr. Grosser alluded to is key. But most importantly, it's just talking the same language and getting a more general understanding and acceptance of some of the modeling and simulation methods that are available to pharmacologists and statisticians and others in CDER in their review processes. So thanks for the opportunity to chime in here, and I look forward to the rest of our session.
Thank you, Dr. Lavange. Can I next request Dr. Tannenbaum?
Yes, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. First, thank you so much for asking me to participate in this panel. It's a real honor to be here. I'm particularly excited about the Center of Excellence because it aligns with a lot of the drivers that we had for establishing the International Society of Pharmacometrics back in 2011. At the time, there were a lot of different working groups that were operating in parallel to serve the modeling community, and most had similar objectives, but they were hosted by different organizations and they had different subgroups of participants. And I think this led to a lot of redundancy, a lot of duplication of effort, and most concerningly, in some cases, there were contradictory recommendations from these groups. So one objective of ISOP was to provide a central coordinating body for these activities to reduce redundancy, increase consistency, et cetera, optimize resources, and really to connect with the greater pharmacometrics community rather than these subgroups. So I see the Center of Excellence doing this at the agency level by really bringing together groups that are driving quantitative medicine, but they're doing it in their own ways, and they might not be coordinating efforts to connect with and educate and learn from and be motivated from the greater community. So that's one of my motivations for this. And I know that there's already a lot of cross FDA working groups, at least one on modeling and simulation, but I think to have something specifically focused on quantitative medicine is really important. The offices that are part of this Center of Excellence, you'll probably see different types of questions, different data sources, different methodologies and models, but really things like infrastructure, process, tools, strategy, templates, impact, et cetera. They have such a significant overlap that this just makes sense. And I think there's probably many industry scientists that are preparing submissions and they're sending it to these different offices for the same compound. So this Center of Excellence supporting standardization and consistency, I think will be of great value. I'm also excited to see collaboration across a more global regulatory and quantitative medicine community. I think Assam mentioned that in the panel today. So I think that's a very exciting opportunity. I'm glad to go after Alyssa because part of what led me to leadership in statistics and pharmacometrics special interest group at ISOP was the recognition of the significant, and I chose this word deliberately, benefits of collaborating with my statistics colleagues. The learnings and the synergy that followed from that were really valuable. So I think widening the network of quantitative scientists that work together, but come from different backgrounds and bringing different strategies and different mindsets is only going to create benefits for the agency and for the community that it serves. So overall, I'm very optimistic about the Center of Excellence, and I think any initiative that pulls together quantitative minds is a great thing. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Tanwa. And lastly, Dr. Hartman.
Yeah, thank you, Raj, and congratulations on the launch of this Center of Excellence. It's been interesting to see the progress of different quantitative tools progress over the decades. I'm likely the least qualified from a qualitative or a quantitative perspective, being a simple physician, not necessarily formally trained in biostatistics or pharmacometricians, but I'm certainly an end user of this, and I bring a different perspective, a global perspective to this. So it's been interesting to hear the previous discussants and panelists talk about this, much of which resonates with me. I've also been working on implementing some of my own interests in this field, and so I feel that we're kind of at the initiation as opposed to implementation phase of it, and it's hard to initiate something. It's even harder to implement it, and so I think there's a lot of challenges ahead of us, which is okay. I was also thinking about a lot of the stakeholders. I felt as I was listening to some of the presentations, it was like I was in the choir and they were preaching to the choir. I think there's a lot of people who are in the choir here, and then your team has appropriately reached out, not just to the choir, but to the church, and then I felt like we were preaching to the church a little bit. And I think, the biggest challenge for us is going to be, how do we get to the unchurched, right? So there's still a significant proportion of product developers that aren't skilled in really understanding quantitative tools or even how to use them. So I think that what I'm hearing today is really a new effort to try to bring in that group and to try to find folks who haven't been trained and don't necessarily know these different tools. And maybe as we discuss this further, we can think about ways to further implement that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hartman. So as you heard in the morning that we had specific focus areas, and one of the focus areas was stakeholder engagement. Now we are building this up on a track record and a history of several decades of experience. So we know some things, but at the same time, we know a lot of experience, knowledge that exists with our external stakeholders. And this today's workshop itself is one of such efforts of having these kinds of interactions and stakeholder engagement. So as we get started, thank you very much for the initial reactions. As we get started in the panel discussion, I'd like to lean upon your experiences and your insights to be able to help us try to appreciate some of the challenges which you already started off, Dr. Hartman, a little bit. Also, what might be the opportunities for us to think about as we go forward with developing some of our strategic and tactical plans. So you heard in the morning, one of the major goals of establishing of this center is to spur innovation as well as its adoption. So if I may, if I can ask Dr. Goburu to take an initial lead at this, how should the center approach the evolving landscape of the technological innovation that is happening in the quantitative medicine with the emergence of various approaches such as machine learning, AI, you name it, and how should we go about identifying these and ensure their adoption? Maybe I can start with you there.
Yeah, so thank you for asking me this question to start with. I want to be a little bit direct here. I think my advice is to approach approach this with decisions in mind, and tools will follow. That's has been my philosophy from the beginning. So what I mean by that is that this Center of Excellence in Quantitative Medicine, my suggestion is that the types of drug products and devices we are developing today are completely different from what we have 20 years ago. Now we have mRNA-based, siRNA-based, CAR T cells, vaccines. A very different development strategies are required. So I encourage you to consider some of these as strategic goals that are focused on creating an impact, and then tools will follow. So model integrated evidence of effectiveness. What is the best way to leverage natural history data? How do we leverage external controls? Expanding MIDD reach, including lifecycle management. Probably this Center of Excellence can revisit FDAMA, the FDA Modernization Act of '97, to expand scenarios where a single RCT randomized controlled trial meets statutory evidence of evidentiary standards. When are single-arm trials acceptable? So if you, and then use MIDD to support novel endpoints, including biomarkers for various purposes. If you then bring in the necessary tools, like whatever it may be, the regular pharmacometrics tools, PBPK, QSP, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data from organs on chips, you name it, but it is for a purpose of answering an impactful question. I'm going to pause there, see if that addresses your question.
Sure. So a couple of things that I noticed here was, from what I heard, was focus on these novel modalities, focus on newer types of questions that can be answered, and you are suggesting that the methods will follow them if we identify the questions of interest, and that should be something worth focusing. My my follow-up, and this might be for others also on the panel as we are discussing this aspect, how do we bridge it to the adoption of some of these? Because there will be always a novelty whenever you're trying something new. So if you or anyone on the panel can touch upon how can we ensure adoption of some of these approaches, because there will be some novelty with these newer methods which will have to be invoked for newer types of questions.
Yeah, I will expose my biases here. I strongly believe the government should not be in my backyard to dictate the methodology. Let me decide what is the best methodology. If it is artificial intelligence, I will use artificial intelligence. If it is a linear regression, so be it, I will do that. But let's agree on the question and what evidence I need to bring to the table. And the way to encourage that FDA is open for innovative approaches is something that was touched by a few of the folks, like best practices. You can share this case study repository. I think actually that is very critical because there is a lot of uncertainties among sponsors about FDA feelings. Can they accept if I used artificial intelligence, or would I delay my drug development because I used it? So you can quell those kinds of fears by increasing your communication and sharing these case studies. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Anyone else on the panel would like to offer a complementary or a differing perspective here?
Yeah, I'll perhaps, Raj, if I could step in, because I do think we can take an example, say from the quantitative systems pharmacology field, right, which 25 years ago maybe was just something people was, what is that, right? And now it's become more business as usual in many pharmaceutical companies, and with many examples of quantitative systems pharmacology being used in to support regulatory decisions and submissions. So I think what worked there could also works for greater adoption, which is really the public sharing, working with societies. Stacey's also already mentioned the International Society of Pharmacometrics, ASCPT. There's so many societies, IQ Consortium, where we share our understanding, where we identify those gaps in knowledge and say, what is the context of use where these approaches are appropriate, right? Can we define that as a community? So I think FDA has been really proactive on this and would encourage the agency to continue to do that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Musante. Dr. Hartman, I saw you come off mute. Do you have anything to touch upon on this?
Yeah, I think, in terms of adopting the approach, one of the things that I always think about is how am I solving somebody's problem, right? So being running a group that does a lot of internal consulting, one of the things that we talk about is we want to solve problems, not be the problem. And the minute we start solving problems, that's when the line starts forming outside my door. And so I always, when I think about how do I get people to, adopt new change, I'm always thinking about ways that I can solve their problem. And then I think, there was a couple of examples mentioned early on, shaving tens of millions of dollars off a development program or years off the timing to get a product approved. I mean, tracking that through some type of knowledge management, I think, is going to be critical, because then you can point to specific areas like, okay, this wasn't just an academic exercise. This resulted in real time and real money savings. Both of which would be applicable to the companies that are developing products, but you start shaving a couple of years off of time. Now you're speaking to the broader population and the patients who will benefit from it as well. And I think those are just critically important.
Excellent. Thank you very much. If we can switch gears slightly, so of the three initial focus areas that I presented in the morning, that for the Center of Excellence that we are thinking, one such area was multidisciplinary education and exchange. So I know, Dr. Tannenbaum, you have been involved with a lot of educational initiatives, starting with ISOP, ACOP, and many such kind of initiatives. And we are thinking that this is a very important element to ensure that we raise awareness. And also, I'm seeing some questions come in the chat also with respect to what should be the what would be the efforts that would help with respect to the education. So, can I ask for your insights on regarding education, quantitative medicine education and training? What should be the key areas of focus, and what kind of mechanisms that in your experience you think would be valuable to utilize to help coordinate some of these efforts?
Thanks, Raj. I have a number of thoughts on that. I think that we really need to think about education sort of twofold. First and probably foremost is to educate our partners. And I think Dan talked about this already, about helping people understand. I saw some comments in the chat, including from Carl, about really helping people understand what is the value of this quantitative medicine. And I think if we can educate our development teams as well as collaborators and FDA reviewers who use the results of modeling and simulation as evidence, that's going to be a really, really critical way towards success. So, because if they don't understand or appreciate the utility of modeling and simulation, they're going to discount the impact of the evidence that stems from it. No matter how convincing you are and how nice your diagnostic plots look, that's not really going to help them make that decision. So the objective of this kind of training isn't necessarily to turn them into technically proficient modelers. That's not what we want to do. It's nice if they understand it and speak the language, but it's really to help them understand what they see, recognize its fit for purpose usage and its rational application, and really to trust the results. So that for me is a very, very important part, and probably the most critical part. Another part, which you've probably all heard me talk about a million times, is we also need to educate our modelers how to communicate properly. And I know, Joga, this is something you also feel very strongly about. I think if we focus a lot on technical skills in our training courses and in our education, and a lot of times we don't go beyond that. And I think training modelers how to communicate appropriately, how to establish trust and credibility, focus on impact, focus on importance, rather than the technical features of the model, is really, really critical. That's going to help all of us, whether we're talking to our project teams, whether we're talking to the agency. We tend to talk to our pharmacometrics colleagues. I work more in pharmacometrics, and we focus our conversations on them, and we forget that there are other people that are listening that really need to hear why it matters. So I think if we can work on, there's a lot of workshops and wonderful educational opportunities that are happening all the time with FDA in collaboration, I know, with University of Maryland, with CERSI and other groups. Considering workshops that really bring in partners. I think a lot of the times that people who participate in these are preaching to the choir. I think Dan brought that point up. So really trying to pull in people who we are serving, either as clients, whether we're internal clients or external clients in consulting, or whether it's your community, the pharmacometrics community, or people who are submitting applications to the agency, I think is a very, very critical start. Maybe I'll pause and see if I have a couple other thoughts, but maybe I'll pause here, and I'm sure Joga would echo my comments, but I'd like to hear from others on the panel as well.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Tannenbaum. Any others on the panel who have complementary thoughts or other perspectives for us to think about in this context of education as a broader goal?
Yeah, I just wanted to second the comments by Dr. Tannenbaum and Dr. Monsante. I see strategy. This is about strategy, so much, not so much about the technique. The only way, in my opinion, to learn it is by case studies. It's like a law, legal cases. So even if they are purged, if FDA can find some way to share them, that can be used as a tremendous resource for training.
Thank you, Dr. Goguru. Any other thoughts on this? I did notice some commonality coming through. We heard about knowledge management and then education. I think Dr. Goburu, you mentioned about case studies being those. Are there any other ways to approach the education as a portfolio for us as we think about what should the center be doing over the next couple of years or so? So that knowledge management team has come through trying to provide these precedent case studies kind of things. Truly appreciate the importance of education, and probably with collaborators whom we work with. I think Dr. Tannenbaum also touched upon communication aspects for modelers. Any thoughts with respect to actually also investing in any of the education related with technical aspects, because there are newer technical approaches that are coming in, and that's something I thought I did not hear. So I thought I'll have an opportunity for the panel to respond. Is that worth thinking, not thinking, or prioritize or deprioritize? Would be useful to hear your thoughts, Dr. Tannenbaum.
Yeah, that's a great question. I kind of want to go back to what Joga said before, and what you said many years ago, I think at the first ACOP, is we're not going to tell you what software to use. We're not going to tell you what methodologies to use. As long as you have a rationale and you use them appropriately, we're going to support that. So I think that FDA can support bringing together people who do the training. And I think there's been 3, 4, 5 papers that have come out very recently about training the next generation of pharmacometricians, as well as training the current people, in both methods and strategy. But I think that I guess I see FDA as being more of that coordinator of these kinds of efforts, as opposed to being the source of this training. And in fact, one of the other thoughts I had is that there's been, as I mentioned before, many trainings and workshops and discussions, and they're there on the FDA website. So one thing that I think would be very useful for the Center of Excellence is to start curating and collating these, and perhaps into a resource library, and working towards publicizing that availability. I think in particular, materials that are coming out of other offices, I work specifically with the Office of New Drugs, with pharmacometrics, and there are probably materials from other offices that we've not had the opportunity to interface with during our pharma careers, but they may have some really insightful and valuable materials, which can enhance our understanding. So I think in terms of methodological, I think that's going to be hard, because it is so broad and there are so many methods out there, and you want to pick the right tool for the job. But maybe making curating a list of resources and types of trainings. There's a lot out there in public as well. So maybe having some efforts towards pulling together some of that would be of value as well.
Dr. Hartman, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, so just a couple of thoughts on the training. I have found that we are much better at technical training than we are at non-technical training. And I think that's likely to be the case. Well, going forward. So thinking about technical training, and specifically about the Center of Excellence, I think there's a great opportunity to think about other regulatory agencies. I just visited a pharmaceutical company in Bangladesh, and I was just trying to think, like, how do they tap into something like this? Or how do they work with regulators? They were working with 70 different regulators. If somebody's doing something really innovative, how do we bring the other ones along to do that? So I think there's some real opportunity there from a technical training perspective. On the non-technical, one of the things that I've worked on for quite some time and work with especially my quantitative and scientific teams on is influence. So how do you influence your environment? And that's a harder, I mean, many of us have trained for literally decades on some of the technical skills. And I would say a lot of us haven't put that type of effort into communicating and influencing our environment. So I think there's a real opportunity here for this Center of Excellence to drive from both a technical perspective, but also from an influence perspective. I would recommend, I mean, even mapping out, and it sounds like you have, in the fact that you're having a panel with external stakeholders is great. I would typically map out who are my stakeholders. I would have a formal plan. I would write it down. I would prioritize them. I would take it that serious to think through ways to do that, and then just listen to them. What are their needs? One of the fun things about global health is I came into it knowing nothing, and I really had to sit back and listen. And so I, when I go to different parts of the world, the first thing I realize is I probably don't know much about what's going on. And so then I just have to sit back and listen to them. So I think reaching out to some of these stakeholders that you'll write down, and then just going out and listening. So what can we do to be most helpful for you? How can we solve your problem? I think that would be a really interesting way to start.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Hartman. Dr. Guguru, last word on this?
Oh, I mean, we can move on to other topics if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead, complete your thought, and then
where I was going is that I think that this is consistent with what Dr. Hartman and Dr. Tannenbaum indicated, which is if FDA partners with academic institutions or these professional organizations in being part of that course technical training, it might make sense. But for regulatory agencies to sign up to educate on technical is a bit stretch, I think. But here is where I interpret education from a regulatory point of view is the single most gap in terms of the understanding among sponsors is that they are not sure about the acceptability of a certain approach by the FDA. To me, that is where FDA can join hands with these educational institutions and our professional organizations to share that you can come up with these innovative approaches, and we are here to talk. And you do that actually already. If you see Dr. Zhao, Dr. Liu, and Dr. Zhu, they all talk about these newer technologies, MIB, AIML, in conferences. So that kind of inspires confidence among sponsors that they can bring these newer tools. Now, the other side of the coin is educating your own staff. You can use the same forums for that.
Thank you very much. Those were very helpful and insightful suggestions. Definitely will definitely resonate what Dr. Hartman said about writing this out and then actually sitting down and listening and getting that kind of perspectives before we engage in any activities. That's very helpful. We'll switch gears slightly here. We did present in the morning that the center brings together different parts within the center, different offices in the center, and the core value there is collaboration. So my next question is going to pivot on collaboration and how can we, what might be the opportunities that we can identify to actually foster or even increase collaborations. Maybe I can turn to Dr. Lavange on this one. One of the examples when you were at the FDA was this Fit for Purpose initiative, which got started, which is an excellent example of collaborative effort between Office of Clinical Pharmacology and Biostatistics. Maybe you can draw upon that experience, or since from past or since then, what might be the opportunity space for us to actually identify these collaborative opportunities and build upon them?
Thanks so much, Raj. I love to speak on this topic. As a possible segue from the education and training to the collaboration, though, I do want to point something out. Schools of pharmacy, I think, have really done an excellent job for several decades now in teaching statistics to their students. I don't think the reverse is true. If you look at statistics and biostatistics graduate programs, you are not going to see courses in pharmacology or pharmacometrics or any subfield of that. I am proud to say that at UNC, in both our doctoral level clinical trials class and a special course I taught in spring 2020 on regulatory science, that we have lectures on at least PK/PD modeling and also clinical trial simulation, and have invited speakers in for that purpose. Dan Weiner being a UNC adjunct faculty member who is handy for that. And I think if I think about a world where collaboration is even more powerful, which I think this new center could help with, that, we need to fix that. Now, the reason I mention it is you've got new PhD level or master's level reviewers coming in with statistical degrees. They're coming into the Office of Biostatistics. The assumption is probably that they haven't had much training in pharmacology and in just the basic tools, much less, things like quantitative systems and PK/PD. So, sorry, PB/PK. So, I think maybe this center could help really launch some internal training in a lot of directions. And that's one direction that you might want to think about from my view outside. Okay, so Dr. Grosser also talked about the Fit for Purpose initiative, and I do think this is a great example of the particular collaboration I was asked to speak on between the Office of Biostatistics and the Office of Clinical Pharmacology. And of the 4 Fit for Purpose tools that have been accepted, one is the disease model in Alzheimer's, which was the first one, which is extremely useful for disease modeling, which helps with endpoint identification, biomarkers, so many things, clinical trial design. The other 3 all have something to do with dose finding. And I think that that's a good background story. I was there in FDA in 2015 and 16 when we were reviewing the second tool, MCP mod, which is multiple comparisons and modeling for dose finding trials. And this was an important, it's a good case study, even though it's 8 years old now, just to talk for a minute about it. The landscape was that phase 2 trials for dose finding were being relied on to provide the second confirmatory trial for drug approval. And they weren't designed for that. And what was lacking in the eyes of the statistical reviewer was a good type 1 error control for multiple comparisons across the multiple doses. However, designing an early dose finding trial with that type of control is not very efficient and can, depending on the control procedure you use, can be quite inefficient. So was there a way to combine the modeling strength of finding a dose with assumptions about the dose response relationship with something that would make the statistician feel better about the chance of an error due to just testing too many doses, the multiple comparisons problem? And this was one such method developed by statisticians and pharmacometricians at Janssen and Novartis that was first submitted to Europe, the EMA, for qualification, and then came to the FDA, and we settled on the Fit for Purpose. It's an example of the collaboration that I think this center can foster, because there was both a pharmacological review and a statistical review, and the team worked together. All 3 of the Fit for Purpose tools, the 2 Bayesian tools, as well as the MCP mod, were received a review in both disciplines. And I think what happens when those disciplines come together is you harness the strengths of each discipline, which can be quite different. You've got statisticians very knowledgeable about probabilistic mechanisms and potential sources of bias, knowledgeable about all the assumptions different models and modeling frameworks require to be okay. And then worrying about sources of uncertainty, which I think Dr. Grosser talked about very well. All of those things can throw the proverbial wrench into a review, right? But you collaborate ahead of time and understand the pharmacology, the disease, the drug action mechanisms, the biology, and use the models that are powerful, the simulation tools that are powerful to predict different clinical trial designs and other scenarios. And then, see if you can't come up with solutions, and those solutions that are collaborative by nature. That to me is where the real strength of accelerating and streamlining drug development occurs, and that is the goal of this Quantitative Medicine Center of Excellence. I don't know the magic blueprint for making this happen more often. The fit for purpose tools aren't coming in fast and furiously, so that can't really be the platform. But I think that there's enough knowledge about the areas where pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies want to innovate, particularly moving into the confirmatory trial environment, where there is the most nervousness about using the biology, using the disease models, using the data from previous trials, borrowing data for external controls from real world data sources. All of these topics of innovation are talked about. Jogo talked about that. Apologies, have a ambulance. I live close to the university hospital here. It'll pass in a minute. Anyway, all of those opportunities for collaboration, they're quite powerful, and the benefit to not just the pharmaceutical companies, but to the patients themselves. The patients are the reason we want to streamline and accelerate drug development. The benefit could be quite high. So I guess I would point to the fit for purpose process and think back to some of those early examples and why we were so motivated to work together, and see if there can't be some other opportunities in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Lavange. And in the morning session, we heard from some of the leadership from the individual offices in the CDER, the enthusiasm to actually work towards these kinds of collaboration. So based on what you heard and from your experiences, and this is a question broadly for the entire panel, are there things that specifically resonated, or things that we should also take into account as we think of trying to develop these collaborations? Any thoughts or perspectives would be helpful.
The other panelists may want to chime in here. I already pointed to the Office of Generic Drugs and what lessons could be learned there in the Office of New Drugs. I think that could be particularly exciting. At least in my tenure at FDA, I felt like OGD was sort of a world unto itself with very particular problems, right? And there might be some translation into other areas of CDER that could be quite interesting. I know that through the broad agency announcements, there's a lot of interest and support by FDA of different research projects that are quite innovative. I think there's several focused right now on the use of real world data sources for either historical or external controls, or to supplement concurrent controls in confirmatory trials. And I have actually was a part of one of those grants at UNC that's just now wrapping up. That could be a terrific area for, it could be a terrific area, even though it doesn't immediately come forth as a pharmacological application. The modeling and simulation tools and the knowledge of the drug and its action, as well as the disease modeling in particular, if you're going to external control data sources, is going to be important. So I see that as a ripe area for collaboration, a very specific, problem. But I think there's many others. The other thing I'll mention, even though I can't call it a success, is there was a lot of work in 2012 going forward with Dr. Woodcock's antibacterial task force. And we had a really nice collaboration with the Office of Pharmacology and the Office of Biostatistics, because quite a lot of the information from an antibacterial comes from the lab, right? The Petri dishes. And so trying to incorporate more knowledge of the drug to come up with ways to streamline antibacterial drug development is important. And I think some of that spilled over into the COVID-19 era, where I do believe during the pandemic, we had excellent example of collaborations across all of the offices at CDER, really like, I had not seen before. So that was quite encouraging. So I think in a particular disease area, a lot of communication between the different disciplines. I'm focusing on pharmacology and biostatistics, but this comes up with clinical reviewers, toxicologists, the whole array of disciplines. Early collaboration, a lot of communication, identifying the areas where innovation could really help. Those are the activities that the center could really champion. And I think the payoff for that would be quite big.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lavange. Dr. Goburu, before you go ahead, I saw Dr. Musante come off mute real quick. Just want to make sure if you had something to offer here before we go on to Dr. Goburu.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Matabushi. I did want to echo Dr. Lavange's idea that it's very important that we come together as many different disciplines to inform and accelerate our clinical trials and our submission processes for drug approval and for patients. One thing that we have done at our organization is we do have an MIDD plan that is part of our clinical development plan. It's a required component. And with that, we are working across our clinical team, our statistics team, our clinical pharmacology team, and our pharmacometrics and systems pharmacology team to decide what analysis what are the research questions first, what analysis needs to be done, what data needs to be done, and by when and who does what. And by having those conversations very early, it really helps to streamline our process. It also helps to raise issues as they're encountered, to say, this is not the plan that we had. What is going to be the mitigation of this change? So I really want to echo that. I also want to echo reaching out across CDER for collaborations, and also the devices group. The devices group at the agency has been doing some stellar work in terms of VVUQ and model validation, verification, and uncertainty quantification, and really some innovative approaches. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration with both within the agency, within CDER itself, and also across, we've already mentioned professional societies and academic groups. So there's a huge opportunity. I would encourage you to break it into small chunks, look for low-hanging fruit first, and then have some successes while you're developing a longer-term plan.
Thank you, Dr. Musante. Dr. Goburu?
Yeah, so on this topic about collaboration, right? Stakeholders, there are a couple of topics I would like you to consider. One is going to be this is for internal FDA, staying abreast with the latest advances. The truth of the matter is, even FDA scientists would need education on some of these newer modalities, right? So you could foster some kind of a collaboration with the pharmaceutical companies and or other educational institutions to have like a way to keep your scientists abreast with the latest, like a lunch with the lambs. You can define who the lambs are, but something like that, And then the second one is going to be, there are certain areas while we talk about rare disease and orphan, but there are some quotes neglected areas which are drugs for which they're off patent and they are neglected in orphans. And given the access to real world data, you might want to consider leveraging partnerships with some academic hospitals. See if you can somehow enhance the pharmacotherapy, precision pharmacotherapy or make these labels modern, where there is information, but it's not reflected in the labeling right now. So you may, that includes some of the new indications as well, extending the indications. So something like that is a different type of collaboration I would encourage you to consider.
Thank you, Dr. Goburu. Actually, some of the things that between what Dr. Musante and you mentioned actually transitions us to outward facing. Essentially, we talk predominantly on inward collaborations. So obviously, there are professional societies, there are patient advocacies, there is industry, so many other stakeholders out there. And in fact, in the question and answers from the audience, there were questions around who are all these external stakeholders that you are thinking of. So maybe I can ask this question to the panel on who should we be thinking of and how to go about establishing these kinds of stakeholder engagements or partnerships. And maybe I can call upon Dr. Hartman, given your presence in the global space and your unit as an integrated development, to start off to help us on how should we approach this community partnership.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I think it's important to think about not just who, but how to approach people. You know, in terms of collaboration, these are all team sports. These are not individual sports, and we need to start thinking about that. Sometimes I've seen in product development, we have like a front row and a second row, and we just need to have a single front row. As we think about collaborations, again, if I'm thinking about who my stakeholders are, I'm also thinking about where is resistance going to come from? And with any change, there's always resistance. And so I actually formally think about that. And that would play into who some of my partnerships would be. You know, how can I identify partners who might be able to minimize the resistance? And then I'd also be looking for partnerships where I can build strong sponsorship for the concept of quantitative medicine. Typically somebody with either financial or human resources, right? So I've always found that the fastest way to make change is great sponsorship. And I think it was great to have some of the leadership of CDER here, but, you know, working through, you know, the entire ranks of the FDA. I know sometimes with some of my more important projects, I'm informing the person whose name is on the building where I work. You know, this is what I'm doing. When you're talking with the Prime Minister of X, here's some of your talking points. So I think that's an important aspect of it. And, you know, again, just trying to understand what some of the challenges are out in the community with some of the key stakeholders, as we've already talked about, I think is key. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Hartman. Anybody else on the panel would like to opine on building these external partnerships, stakeholder engagement?
So maybe I can speak to something you said that resonated with me, is the minimizing the resistance, finding partners who can help minimize the resistance. And sometimes it's about reaching out to those who you know are going to be the skeptics, who you know are going to have resistance, because if you can help them understand it, you know, once you win somebody over to your side, they become your biggest ally. So really reaching out to those who you know are maybe going to be a little bit more resistant, have a little bit more difficulty in understanding the impact. And if you can get them to understand it and support it, and these are people who are influencers, if you will, not TikTok influencers, you know, the kind of influencers I mean, but if they can really help people to support that, and they might be able to bring other resistant folks over to the side of understanding and supporting, you know, quantitative medicine methods. And I think that's a really important to find those people and to actually work towards helping to convince them, or at least helping them to get over some of those humps for understanding what we do and the impact of what we do. So identifying those folks, not just those who will help to minimize it in general because they're supporters, but actually those on the other side, I think can be very valuable. And I think maybe one thing that the Center of Excellence can do is, as you're seeing this resistance, both internally with your stakeholders, internally as well as externally, to help us identify who those are and help us to reach them. I think that would be a wonderful potential for this group.
Thank you, Dr. Tannenbaum. One last topic I would want to touch upon as part of this panel discussion. Time is really running fast here. There are so many topics to think about. One of the one of the key focus areas we have envisioned is spearheading development of best practices, policies, and implementation and adoption of them. So from that perspective, I would like to hear some of the panel's thoughts on what would you advise us on how to think about approaching this? What are the areas that are worth prioritizing? Which are the low-hanging fruits, and what are the ones which are challenging but worth aspiring for to help make some progress there? Any thoughts and perspectives? Maybe if I can start with Dr. Masante to help us have some insights on that.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Matabushi. And I do think that from this Center of Excellence, it will naturally come from your internal efforts to also be developing those internal best practices, as many of us do within our own organizations, that will then go for public comment, become policy eventually, or guidances. So I think that's going to be a natural component. The other part that you hit on was, in terms of what are those low-hanging fruit, what are the areas that are kind of hot right now. So there's a lot of hype in some areas. There are other areas that are more established. So for example, I mentioned earlier, quantitative systems pharmacology. It's something that's been around for quite some time. We've done the landscape analysis that came from FDA, many workshops on understanding the gaps and uncertainties of these methods. How do we bring that to the next level of a guidance, right? That sponsors and others could be using as they're developing these models for regulatory decisions. Could we help to define, as I mentioned before, that context of use for these approaches? I think that's a big area. In an area that I think we are ready to tackle. The other area where I think we need to do much more investigation is in AI/ML. And particularly, we've heard a lot about digital twins, this new technology. What does that really mean when we're talking about drug development? What does it mean in terms of regulatory science? We need to really think about that hype versus, what are the real applications that we could be tackling in the short term versus the longer term, which are the technologies that still need to read out and develop. And that's where I was talking in terms of what we've done internally with our we're calling it an MIDD Center of Excellence, although may want to borrow your name. But how do we really start to evaluate those new technologies? And I think that is an area where the agency could be helping to guide that, where what you're seeing in terms of regulatory submissions could help to inform us, help to inform those folks who are expert in those areas. One thing I'll also just mention related to this and kind of through other topics that we've had is coming back to the education piece. On AI/ML, we recently had a pre-conference for clinical pharmacologists at ASCPT. We did a survey and the overwhelming response of why clinical pharmacologists do not use AI/ML is that they don't have appropriate knowledge, right? So we know that clinical pharmacologists now have knowledge of pharmacometrics, systems pharmacology, know the questions that those are very well suited to address. I think with AI/ML, we don't want those folks to be technical experts. We need to bring the technical experts into the MIDD field who can help us to say, what is the appropriate application? So I hope that helped to perhaps give you some direction where I think the agency could go.
Sure, absolutely. And wish we had way lot more time to discuss. Those are very helpful. It was a really very enlightening round that we had. I've taken a lot of notes. What I would like to say is that this is a start of a series of conversations that we hope to have with stakeholders, experts out there to help us really understand where are the avenues that are worth focusing on, what are the things that are worth doing that are going to have this kind of a broader impact that'll actually help with not only raising awareness, but also ensure adoption of some of these techniques, identify spaces where they are worthwhile investing or applying them, and those areas where there might be other better solutions. So to be able to identify what is a fit for purpose approach here. So a lot of very good feedback that I I think I have received, and hopefully we have touched upon several of the questions that came through the chat. This is going to be an iterative conversation, and we'll really look forward to engaging you and others like you in the field going forward. With that, I'd really like to thank all of you, some of you having taken time out on activities that are ongoing. So I really appreciate you having this kind of a commitment towards this cause, and look forward to working with you all more. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Dr. Matabushi. And thank you to our panelists. I would echo what Raj has said, and I want to say that that was a great discussion, and I'm really looking forward to what comes next for the COE. So with that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. I'd like to welcome Dr. Larry Lasko, who's currently a clinical professor emeritus at the University of Florida College of Pharmacy in Lake Nona. He's a founding director of the UF Center of Pharmacometrics and Systems Pharmacology, and a former director of the Office of Clinical Pharmacology here at FDA. So welcome, Dr. Lasko, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Great. Thanks, Daphne. First of all, sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we
Great.
can hear you.
Okay, we have no storms in Florida disrupting things, so that's good to hear. Well, anyway, thanks you for the introduction and really giving me the opportunity to present a summary of key points. Before I begin, I want to add my congratulations to the team, Raj, Isam, and all of the other folks that launched this Center of Excellence in Quantitative Medicine. It's really quite a feat. I don't think we can overstate the significance of the center to regulatory science and drug development. So we heard today the scope of this center is really ambitious. It's all-encompassing, and it addresses a wide range of regulatory challenges. It's going to be fun for the members of the center to identify their priorities in the next near term and long term. So rather than attempt to summarize all that's been said today or present it, what I'd like to do is frame my remarks with a historical and evolutionary perspective. I think it's useful to provide some context to understand the rationale for the Center of Excellence and some of the lessons learned from the past, both successes and shortcomings of quantitative medicine. To make full disclosure, as Daphne mentioned, I was at FDA for 20 years, 4 years in the Office of Generic Drugs, 16 years in the Office of Clinical Pharmacology. And what's funny to look at the evolution of quantitative medicine. In 1995, sparse samples in clinical trials and population PK models was considered to be innovative and groundbreaking and suspicious about what it can generate in terms of decision-making. The first guidance came out in 1999. It was revised in 2022. And what's interesting, if you look at the two guidances, the first one in 99 really focused on the technicalities of population PK in its 20 or 25 pages. And in the new one that came out in 2022, the emphasis shifted to therapeutic individualization and the use of the tool in labeling. So it just kind of illustrates how things evolve and how things we're talking about today, such as QSP in the early days, how it might be used like population PK in 10, 15, 20 years from now. Well, it's been 20 years, almost to the month, since Janet Woodcock, who was director of the center in 2004, really laid out a groundbreaking vision to improve the success of drug development and advance regulatory science. It was called a Critical Path Initiative. And I was at FDA at the time. I was really proud to be part of its implementation. And 2 years later, in 2006, the CPI laid out really a wide range of more than 70 critical path opportunities, and many of them were based on predictive modeling and simulation. It was referred to in those days as model-based drug development, which is now morphed into what we call model-informed drug development. But I think one of the strong points of the Critical Path Initiative was the idea that collaboration and partnerships among stakeholders was essential. And we've heard so much of that today. And the Critical Path led to the Critical Path Institute, which was set up in Arizona with the help of FDA and under the leadership of Dr. Ray Woosley. So I think that's a good prototype and a good example to think about how to develop and encourage collaborations and partnerships. In the next slide I would say the next slide, please. I don't think I could move them. Yeah, that's fine. Over the 2 decades since the critical path, FDA has really consistently upheld and sustained the core principles of model-based drug development. And I just picked this one quote as an example from the highest leadership, really right down to the frontline pharmacometricians. This is Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He was newly nominated as FDA commissioner in 2017, and I think he summed up perfectly with this quote, the rationale for the timely establishment of the Center of Excellence now in 2024. It was a visionary quote, and I think it's come true. Next slide, please. I think we can, yeah, thanks. I think we can all appreciate, let's call it the rapid pace of new quantitative technologies that's really have transformed the landscape of drug development and regulatory science. That's just not an opinion, but it's based on data. For example, if you look at the percentage of new drug approvals that contain PBPK models, it's doubled over the last 5 years. The number of QSP models, as we've read in the literature submitted to FDA, has also doubled over the past 5 years. So I think these trends underscore really the importance of having a specialized Center of Excellence dedicated to the future adoption of these technologies and the establishment of best practices across the major CDER offices and indeed across the centers within FDA. Next slide, please. I think the sense I had when I read the announcement was that the Center of Excellence in Quantitative Medicine was not necessarily a new concept. Because of the historical perspective that I have on this field, but continues really the legacy of the past. And the nice part about the center is it really builds on the strong lineup of historical achievements in using quantitative models and simulation. You can see them on the left-hand side of the slide. And just how this center will change the trajectory of regulatory science in the future remains to be seen. I believe what we can anticipate is that the center will catalyze new knowledge, demonstrate achievements in quantitative analysis that we haven't seen before, and really based on the pursuit of the 4 goals, which I've highlighted on the right side of the slide, will metaphorically serve as a beacon for the future trajectory and the progress and innovation in quantitative medicine. Next slide, please. Well, I think we all recognize the launching of this center in any organization, really, but especially in FDA, is no small feat. It's going to be a gradual process that's going to unfold over time. So I think we all have to be patient and recognize that this is a long-term commitment of the agency. Raj asked in the last panel about some of the challenges, and as the panelists were answering, I was thinking about these that I've listed on this slide. I'm sure the center has thought about these challenges already. They may not have figured out the technical way to approach them, but I think these are the things that really pop up as key challenges for the implementation of this center to be successful. One is, people have touched upon it, the people and culture, often called the greatest assets in an organization. And in my experience, integrating individual functional day-to-day work across offices, across people, with the culture of different offices is going to be a challenge. There's 5 offices represented in this center, and it's not always straightforward to integrate people and culture, but I think it's not impossible, and I think the center has the leadership to get it done. I think secondly, in so many words, this was mentioned in the previous panel, creating a demand for the center, not the center per se, but its functions, and facilitating the adoption of its mission. So my view of this is to really see the pipeline of the center, look for curated examples, and there's many examples to choose from, with a high value and a good chance of collaborative success. In other words, in the next couple of months, identify some quick wins and some low-hanging fruit that the center can make claim to illustrate the future trajectory. The third thing is identifying what I call the evangelists. And These are people that enthusiastically support and promote the center, and many of them are on this call. Many of them are part of the executive team of the center, but it's promoting this center to a wide audience, internally and externally. Many people are asking questions about what it means to me. So raising awareness, identifying partnering opportunities, stakeholders, and listening seriously to the feedback, some of which you heard in the previous panel, to iterate the strategy of what is learned. Next slide, please. So next slide is really a page out of let's say the Center of Excellence playbook. Building the plane while flying it is a metaphor that I like to use here. And everything's blank here. We know the high-level objectives. They've been presented by the center director this morning. Raj has reiterated them. What we don't know exactly is the strategy, and most importantly, the tactics, and down the line, the metrics to document the success of this center. It isn't going to be static. We're going to see many iterations of the center as we move forward into the future. But I think we're going to be all looking forward to learning more about at least the strategic plan for the center, so that we can talk amongst our colleagues and our friends in the community about what this center means and how we can leverage it for the success of modeling and simulation. Next slide, please. When you think about organizations building something like a center of excellence or a new specialized team, I think about the boxes that have to be checked off to improve the likelihood of success. And on this slide, what I've listed are really 6 check boxes. And you can read them from the leadership endorsement at the high level to the buy-in by others in the organization. I think this center checks all the boxes. And having checked all these boxes, I think we're ready for a launch that's going to be successful for this center to be really something to look at in 3 to 12 months from now. Next slide, please. I'm going to close again with reiterating my congratulations. This was a major effort, I know, internally from my own days at FDA. And I think this workshop represents really a good time for a call to action. I've heard that comment amongst the comments today. And I really would encourage all stakeholders on this call, not on this call, to consider supporting and participating in the activities of the center, as Raj asked in his introduction this morning. I think we have a really bright quantitative science community. I think together we can make a meaningful difference in the success of this center and really improve the decision-making and development and regulatory together. The only thing I would end with is a word of caution. We all have worked with models. We have to be cautious about relying too much on the models without considering their complexity, assumptions, and uncertainties. And I think everybody understands that. So we all want to make the best regulatory decisions without the risks for our patients for bad decisions. So having an informed balance between what I'll call model land, which is the modeling and simulation world, and the real world, which is the one we have our patients live in. Getting that balance right, I think, is going to be important. So I'm sure people will be paying caution to that as we talk about innovation and new models and so on. So with that, I'll close and say thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lasker. That was great. Next slide, please. All right. Finally, for today, I'd like to welcome back Dr. Zene to provide some closing remarks and comments on next steps for this Center of Excellence, and opine a bit on what we've heard today and provide some perspective. Dr. Zene?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks again, Daphne. Thank you, Larry, too, for closing this out with your vision. Clearly one of the sort of early organizational leaders at FDA on this. So I, too, like Larry, don't think I will summarize, because this was just such a wealth of conversation. I think we'll be very eager to go back and digest what we've heard. And there are also some really excellent questions, clarifying questions as well as suggestions and ideas in the Q&A. So we look forward to looking at those as well. So let me talk a little bit about what's next. First and foremost, thank you to everyone that was on a panel and spoke today for their perspectives and also for their thought partnership, which we think is the kind of model of transparency that we hope is critical for advancement of the Center of Excellence and the field. And thank you to Daphne and many others who organized this. I do want to emphasize that, at least from what we've heard, the COE was kind of a pleasant surprise. It came out of nowhere. But I do want to note that the inception for this organization goes back to even before we were disrupted in 2020 by COVID, and discussions and planning seriously came about in earnest over 2 years ago. So this has been in the works by a lot of people. Many people have been involved in planning, and I want to especially acknowledge our colleagues in the program evaluation and implementation staff in CDER's Office of Program and Strategic Analysis, done a instrumental job in every aspect of the COE to date, and look forward to their partnership moving forward as well. So what's next? I think you heard from Dr. Matabushi, the key next steps, the immediate next steps are pushing forward with our strategic planning and implementation plan development. This is a very detailed work plan that gets at the heart of what programs and initiatives we would like to bring online in support of this collective mission. What are the best mechanisms for dynamic exchange with stakeholders across this entire spectrum of activity we've been discussing today: drug discovery, drug development, the regulatory process, and drug utilization on the back end. Something that particularly struck me was something Dr. Gaburu raised, which is a key question we all have in mind: is to what end? To what end are all of these activities? And so part of our strategic planning is to think about those measures of success that we know that if we achieve them, we will be advancing the field for the benefit of patients. Also, a thing that for me resonated was hearing about this need to reach beyond our immediate sort of sphere of acceptance. We're preaching to the chorus, and those do include other groups like regulatory affairs, clinician groups, patient advocacy groups. And so what are the strategies to best engage with communities that we haven't engaged with, especially, I would say, for patients? We mentioned, quantitative medicine was named as such to center patients, but also an exciting question is, what does integration of quantitative and computational approaches to patient care look like? There's increasing interest and programs in precision medicine approaches that do integrate quantitative, biological, computational, lab sciences to optimize patient care and improve outcomes. So thinking about that as an opportunity space is very exciting as well. We anticipated questions about scope and implications. What does this mean for the business of drug development? What does this mean for regulatory evaluation? Questions about how does the center interact with other programs in CDER, specifically model-informed drug development, complex innovative designs, fit for purpose. There are governance structures in place already for AI, machine learning, real-world evidence, and data. And there are a lot of opportunities across those groups to harmonize our approaches to evaluation of the science. So, and not to forget other centers, which I think was appropriately raised in the Q&A and in the chat. And so we look forward to clarifying and enhancing understanding around all of those touch points as it relates to the center. I was very appreciative today as well in hearing from many of the panelists about what has worked well for them and their organizations by way of change management. And change management is certainly part of the things that we were thinking about within CDER and beyond. Just a word about the operating philosophy of the COE. The center was developed to address the big opportunity in therapeutic drug development. Quantitative medicine approaches have been used with tremendous impact over the years, not just communicated out by FDA through our anecdotal publications, but also systematically captured by pharmaceutical develops. For example, reports about how the MIDD program has led to reductions in clinical development time, decreased numbers of needed patients to be enrolled, shorter duration of follow-up for clinical trials, obviating the need for unnecessary clinical trials, bottom line savings, quicker no-go decisions, which are also critically important. And so the problem has been that though we know that there is impact here, the application of these kinds of approaches throughout all aspects of drug development and evaluation have been fairly opportunistic. They've been mostly ad hoc. They've been heterogeneously applied across therapeutic areas. Therefore, it's very important for us to bring together the pieces that have been highlighted today: stakeholder engagement, policy development and implementation, knowledge management and education, to ensure that there are no opportunities that are left on the table. The how of how we intend to do that, I think, has also been touched on. The goal is to harness the collective expertise across the center and beyond through partnerships, foster these collaborations, and promote best practices, all of which have been shown to streamline and bring efficiency in terms of communications, process, and driving innovation by centrally locating all of our knowledge and our resource. In terms of why a COE, or why we should be happy, I guess I would say, about a COE as the chosen organizational format that we're moving forward with, this really signals an exceptionally high level of commitment to these activities, to excellence, to innovation, to leadership. It's important to note that this center was not only endorsed by the leadership that you heard from today, including the Office of the Center Director, but our center was also endorsed by the entire executive committee in CDER. And for those who don't know who that is, these are all of the office directors of the major super offices within CDER. So not just the Office of Generic Drugs and the Office of Translational Sciences and the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality and New Drugs, to which we all belong, but the Office of Medical Policy, Surveillance and Epidemiology, Regulatory Policy, and on and on and on. So it speaks to the importance of the huge organizational commitment to making this long-term, sustainable, and emphasizing the need for collaboration and maximizing synergies through the sharing of all of our collective efforts. Just one or two more points in regard to Dr. Lesko's keys to success, which I appreciate him sharing. A few features that bode very well for us that I'm excited about moving into the future is the leadership in the COE has, which you've heard from today, has demonstrated exceptional leadership. They have used their knowledge, skills, abilities, influence to positively impact not only their own organizations, but have an eye towards patients and society, and have held themselves to very high standards of scientific standards, ethical standards, and interpersonal standards in all the work that we do. So it's a very exciting time for us that we're bringing all of these leaders together to multiply that influence collectively. Underpinning that leadership excellence is a very strong sense of stewardship. The Center of Excellence is very committed to serving the public, as you've heard today, and all of the objectives and actions that we hope to take in the future will be unquestionably aligned with public health goals and interests. And the final piece to get excited about is this is a community building proposition, which I think, again, you've heard about throughout the day. We do recognize that we are members of a huge community, both within FDA, within CDER, which is massive, and outside. And we really value and foster quality interactions. I think that the fact that over 2,000 people registered for this workshop today also demonstrates that many others see this as a community building proposition. So we very much look forward to our partnerships and moving the center forward with your vision, collective vision, and support. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Daphne to close us out. Thank you.
Thanks, Isam. Next slide. So finally, we would just like to thank everyone for joining us today, for all the great presentations as well as great panel discussion. You can always reach out to us if you have feedback for the Center of Excellence at our email address, cederquantmed@fda.hhs.gov. And we look forward to interacting and hearing from you as we build this Center of Excellence. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.